just want to give you an idea of what this case is about. Would love to give you a brief description and a real quick 4-minute recreation video for those that aren't super familiar with this case. Shockingly, I find people all the time that don't know the Travis Walton case that well, and yet it's one of the best cases we have out there, and we'll be taking a very deep look at it today. Basically, these loggers were heading home from work, and 7 of them saw what they describe as a UFO floating in the air 20 feet off the ground and 20 feet in diameter. Travis runs out of the truck to get a closer look, and he gets zapped by some sort of energy beam, goes flying through the air as depicted in all the pictures around here. At which point, the rest of them take off in the truck, panicked, assuming that he is dead. And then Travis is the only one who has this story of what happened upon the craft. So we're going to play that for you right now. It's just 4 minutes, a little recreation video that they've made, and that'll give you an idea of what happened to Travis while he was on the craft. If we could play file 1, please.
When I regained consciousness, I was in such pain that it would actually sort of knock me back out again, the pain. I knew something was terribly wrong with my body. I could move, but it was so difficult. But I felt I was probably safe in a hospital, that I was being taken care of. There was some sort of device across my chest. I had a lot of pain in my chest. I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and I just took this to be doctors. Then when I looked in the direction of the movement sounds, I could see blurry forms that I thought were doctors wearing surgical caps and masks. So when I sharpened the focus in my eyes, I could see that was not the case. I was looking into the face of this creature. Then I knew I was in very great danger. And here this face was so close to me, another right behind him. The fear gave me the strength to raise my arm. It pushed the one that was standing close to me back, and he fell into the other one. I was rolling away from him, and this object across my chest fell off. I got on my feet and staggered back, and I bumped up against a shelf, and there was an array of instruments laying out there. I just glanced, grabbed the biggest thing I could find, and started flailing in their direction to keep them from coming any closer. That moment was the focus of my nightmares for months afterward. They stopped with their hands extended towards me and staring in a way that felt invasive and intrusive, like they were looking inside of me. It was horrible. I came to realize that it had to do with the stare, and the stare was them trying to reassert control, I think. Once it was apparent they weren't going to physically or even telepathically control me, they turned and left the room and went to the right. And so I went in the opposite direction that they had gone. Were they behind me? Were they pursuing me? Or was around this tight curve that I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, was I going to run into something worse? Adding to the panic was this feeling of suffocation, this feeling I was about to pass out from lack of air. I came to a doorway and looked in. I was fearful of the chair in the middle. It was a high-back chair, and I was afraid there could be someone sitting in it. So when I moved to the side and could see that there was no one in it, then I moved towards the chair. And it was then that I realized that the closer I came to the center of the room, the walls, the floor, the ceiling were darkened except for points of light. It was a planetarium kind of a projection. My main concern was open these doors. I assumed that perhaps the buttons that were on the arm of this chair might open the door. That moved the star pattern. I was already unsteady on my feet. I turned and there was a man in the door. He had this glass helmet over his head. I started towards him, babbling questions and trying to tell him about these creatures that were in there. He took me by the arm and was leading me out. We went through what I think was an airlock. You know, this door closed and that door opened and we went out. At this point, the craft we came out of was parked inside of this big hangar-like building, or it might have been part of a larger craft. He led me towards the vertical wall opposite this, through some doors, down a hallway into a room where there were some other people. They were very similar to him. A similar dress, similar coloring, light-colored hair, light-colored eyes. They're leading me, taking me by the arm and putting me over towards this table. I was in a weakened condition, but I felt their strength. But still, the panic I had at being restrained like that, I was able to jerk one hand free, and they put this mask over my face, and I got my finger under the edge of that trying to pull it away. But before I could pull it away, boom, I was out.
Pretty scary. Pretty wild. Okay, well, now I'd like to introduce the producer of the documentary about Travis, the true story of Travis Walton. Truth be told, the de facto producer of this event, as she was beyond invaluable in amassing everyone for today's event, not to mention the countless hours of video and audio footage that she was able to send over to us. It's just been invaluable. And I'd like to bring her to the stage now. Please welcome Jennifer Stein.
Hi, Ron. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's so nice to be here with you. It's a huge undertaking, and I'm so impressed with what you and Jordan have done in organizing this whole day. It's really very, very special, and thanks for including me and Travis and making this possible. It's a great SkyFire summit. You know, we've been trying to do these every year since the 40th anniversary, and it's the first time we've ever done an international virtual conference. Maybe we'll do another year, because it's really the anniversary of the date. You know, this event happened November 5th. And so we are now doing it on the weekend of November 5th, which is usually what we've tried to do, a conference or a screening or some lectures or tying in with another UFO group like Phoenix MUFON or something. So it's great. This is, I think, the 6th year in a row we've done something.
Wow. It's great.
Yeah.
So go ahead and introduce this encounter at Turkey Springs to let people know what this is.
Yes. Well, I will agree with you in the comments that you stated when you began. This story, I'm still amazed. I run into people all the time who do not know much about the Travis Walton case. And especially younger and younger generations, you know, every 20 years, there's a new generation that grows up and they're learning about this case for the first time. I remember when I first learned about it, I was stunned and shocked because there's so much incredible, evidence that lines up that would be very, very difficult to hoax or somehow create. And yet this story continues to be attacked. When I had a chance to meet Travis Walton, Peter Robbins introduced me, and I had been running a number of conferences. We were running the Roswell conference. I was working as Peter Robbins' assistant, and he suggested that I and he help Travis create, you know, an event in his hometown. That's how the first film came about. I'll speak a little bit more about that when I introduce the actual documentary that I produced in 2015 and then kind of remade in 2017-18. But when you make a film, as most filmmakers will know, and I know we're having a filmmaker panel, they'll probably tell you, it becomes really kind of more important what you don't include, because you can easily make a 5, 6, 7 hour film. So to hone it all down to a really, really tight story, you usually have to get rid of a lot of other extemporaneous, you know, great comments, great interviews that you just can't use. And when the Travis film started to win multiple awards, and it really has, I'm really very, very honored. It's won about 28 mainstream film festival awards. And I give total credit to my nephew, Adam Stein, and an editor we both worked with closely named Zach Weil, Zach Weil from Contact Light Films. Had it not been for these young 30-year-olds, my 4 or 5 hour film might not have been as tight and as concise as it was. And I'm very grateful for them. So long story short, I know I'm rambling a bit here, but the long story of this is I had about 40 hours of film footage of all different interviews. And of course, when I started in 2015, I started in like 2012, working on the 2015 version of the film. We didn't yet have disclosure. And according to my interpretation of what's gone on since December 16th, 2016, we are now living in a post-disclosure world. So everything is different about the UFO topic being considered mainstream in the press and no longer having the laughter curtain. So once the main documentary was out, started to win awards, started to screen at a lot of conferences, started to get Travis many speaking engagements around the world as we had anticipated. I thought, people were saying, man, you should do another film. Do you have more footage? I've been approached by and licensed lots of footage that wasn't used in the film to many television companies around the world. In fact, there's one coming out with the Travel Channel in about 2 weeks, I think, or even maybe a week. I think there's going to be a program on November 11th with the Travel Channel, a 2-hour special. So many people have said, Jen, why don't you take all this footage that you have and, master a compendium film, create another piece that goes more in depth. And certainly when COVID hit, I had a lot of time on my hands. So I lined up all my hard drives and I started reorganizing and looking at the footage. And that's basically how most of this compendium footage came about. I've been working with a lovely person I've worked with for years at a local television station right in the Philadelphia area. I've been running a program there on my cable access network for about 15 years now. So Brian Farrell and I started putting our heads together, and the edit you're going to see is one that Brian mastered down from some of the footage I had sent him. And it's following the path of the first film. And I'll just mention this, there are many UFO films that are made, and many of them never make it into a mainstream film festival because, not only there's the laughter curtain that's been up for a long time and nobody's taken the topic seriously, but I think the reason that the Travis film was so well accepted and then won awards is because it's really a personal journey, a personal story. It's from the perspective of Travis. It's basically told almost with a narration of the different people we've interviewed. There's no main narrator that's been, ever in the film leading you along like a lot of documentaries do. And because it tells the personal story of how difficult it is to live through what Travis went through and what all the loggers went through. None of them really had a choice about coming forward. And in many ways, this event ruined their lives. So you get a perspective that, the UFO journey is not all happy and nice. And, you kind of have to be careful what you wish for. And the compendium, which I'm calling Encounter at Turkey Springs, because that's the area where this event took place, in the Turkey Springs area of the Sitgraves National Forest in northeastern Arizona. So Encounter at Turkey Springs is literally about this encounter, how it's affected many people's lives. And there are people you don't see as much in the first film, like a lot of footage so far that we'll see in this 38-minute piece we're going to watch. There's footage of Don Walton, who is Travis's older brother, who gave me a lovely, lovely interview. There's footage of Deputy Chuck Ellison, and he was the first police officer on the scene when the boys reported Travis missing at the phone booth in Heber. And eventually there'll be other people in there. You'll see a little bit of Steve Bassett in this, but I've got, great footage of Linda Moulton Howe, and I have footage of Nick Pope and Lynn Katai and many, many other people I interviewed. Lots of comments from Lee Spiegel and James Fox that never made it into the first film. So, and Alejandro Rojas. Wonderful people who have been in this field for decades, who have explored and understood it and have wonderful comments to make to help people understand how difficult it has been for all of these loggers. And by putting this program together, I know you, Ron, have learned how this event has sort of, challenged all of these relationships over the decades. And it's very easy for people to get confused or to think that this event didn't happen or didn't happen the way it did. There's debunkers. They've been traditionally out there for decades, and looks like we have some new ones on the horizon as well. Kind of new young wannabes who want to go after this story. But the story really stands the test of time. And I hope that Encounter at Turkey Springs will be as an equally important archival film for history, as younger generations tend not to read. They tend to get their information from sound bites. And hopefully, by watching and learning with a good documentary, they'll get a better insight than they might just by watching a short television program. And so I'm sort of doing this for history and doing it because it's a good challenge for me as a filmmaker. And I had a lot of time on my hands, like a lot of other people did in COVID. So I got to rethink and reprioritize things, I guess, in my life. And this was an important project. So I kind of came back to it. After I handled all my family footage and did a bunch of family archival stuff, then I said, let me go back to the Travis project and see what's there. So hopefully I'll be shooting some new interviews for it as well. And it'll be an interesting piece. I don't have a deadline when it's going to come out because I'm not really under a time frame. But that's, I think, the best introduction I can give you to this upcoming 38-minute piece we're going to look at.
I always think of Travis as the most credible case, and mainly because he's so down to earth. I think one description I've heard given of him is salt of the earth.
Well, I know Travis collegially as someone who is important to the ET issue.
He was a very humble man, very quiet man.
I always had the sense, and still do, that he is consistently a very kind, smart, down-to-earth, soft-spoken individual. But when you get him talking about things that either happened to him or that he believes, he's right on focus.
I consider him to be of one of the top, most credible people in the field, period. You know, I have not a shadow of doubt in my mind that Travis is telling the truth, the rest of them are telling the truth. Not even a sliver of doubt. I put my life on it. I absolutely believe him.
Several thousand acres of nationally preserved forest stretch from this point in Arizona into southern Colorado and on into New Mexico. It is the Sitgraves National Forest, and it sits about 1,500 feet above the valley floor. On November 5th of 1975, having finished work in an area of forest known as Turkey Springs, one such team was finishing up their workday. 22-year-old Travis Walton, already in the jump seat of the work truck. He and the men he was with were getting ready to leave. It was about 6 p.m. I can't imagine that anything would have prepared them for what was about to happen in their lives.
I was the crew boss. It was my contract, and I hired Travis and several other guys. There was a lot of turnover, you know, but Travis had been working for me for practically 10 years already. His brother worked for me before that. That's how I got to know him. Well, the thing was, we had to work until after dark. We had to work until we couldn't see any longer. We're trying to, I mean, we got there at dawn, even though it was wintertime. And we took, I think it was 3 lunch breaks, you know, but it was a very long day, you know, it's 14 hours, I think, over 14 hours.
They were timber thinners on a contract with the U.S. Forest Service. And they were out there working, and it had got dark, and they were preparing to go home. Came to this clearing, a very brilliant object appeared, and it looked like a UFO, and it was there, and Travis became excited, and so he bailed out of the truck to run over there to it.
As it got closer, I heard the sound, and it was like a beep. you know. And I don't know if anybody else heard that or not, you know. And then it was a low rumble like, and then I really panicked then. You know, we've been hauling for Travis to come back. I really panicked. I go, oh shit! And I turn and I look, turn my head the other way, and then the woods all lit up a bluish green, like, you know. And I turned back and looked. And the last I saw, you know, before I turned my head, Travis was bent over, you know, looking up at this thing with his hands in his, I can't remember his pants pocket or his jacket pocket. And when I look back, he's a few feet off the ground and he's stretched out like this. Kind of came down a little bit of an angle, then he hit the ground and just crumpled up on the ground. And that's when Mike started the truck up and took off, you know.
Seeing their friend Travis hit by this powerful beam of light and thrown was so shocking to these men that they basically fled in fear for their lives.
Flying out of there, because I was going pretty fast out of there, and I remember hitting a tree and knocking the mirror off the truck and everything, and I came up this one hump. There was a curve in the road, and I came up to this one hump, and it was a pretty large hump, and the only way to do it is to angle the truck in a certain way, and I didn't do that, so I had to stop. Most of the guys got out. I don't remember if they all got out. It seemed like Steve Pierce was kind of like in the background all the time, you know. It was pretty hectic, and it was very emotional at that point.
According to their story, they turned around and went back.
Yeah, we used the headlights of the truck, and we had the flashlight there. I kept one flashlight in the truck, but should have had more than one. We did go back up and we looked for a while. It seemed like we looked for an hour or so, and we looked way down the hill. They had a four-wheel drive so that we could go down the steeper parts, and there was a little bit of trouble finding the spot. It seemed like one of the other guys had a different opinion right at first, but then it was unanimous there pretty quick about where it was. And you could see where Travis had jumped out of the truck, you know. So we pretty much just covered the place. We didn't walk back through the woods and stuff, but we stayed on the roads and just drove all the roads around. Because I figured that if he was still there, he would be on a road. And if we didn't run into him on a road, he wasn't on this earth anymore. And we never did find him, so.
Travis was not there, and the thing was gone. At that point, I guess, was when they decided to come into town and call the enforcement authorities to check into this.
I think Kenny just told him it was a missing person. He didn't tell him what was up, you know. And when they came out there and saw what was up, they got pretty skeptical about it.
And when I had taken the two out there that I had taken, they did not want to go back. They were frightened and afraid. They did not want to go back. I had to threaten them to get them to go. But when we got there, they showed me exactly where the place was. And I got out and examined the area. And
I knew he wasn't going to be found. I mean, I knew that before we even started looking. It's just that there's at least a vague possibility, you know.
Mike just had a hopeless feeling that Travis was gone. He was not, well, had no idea whether he was coming back. Nobody did.
The sheriff, Marlon Gillespie, I had called him, and Ken Copeland, who was the undersheriff, he was the one-eyed fella, big tall boy, and they were in Lakeside somewhere, and they were coming over.
Ellison was the first one there because he was the one that Ken called.
Sheriff Gillespie, although suspicious of possible foul play, could also tell these men had been through a truly traumatic event.
And when they came, some of the other guys from the department came, and we all went to the scene again. And Marlon trusted me. He trusted me to do the job. And I mean, after all, they hired me and put me out there by myself, and they just left me alone. It was a kind of a wood area. There was trees around it, and there was leaves and stuff and vegetation on the ground, and I could not see a skid mark of any kind, like as if some kind of aircraft had touched on the ground. and I kind of run my spotlight around the area, and I couldn't see anything that was disturbed, like bushes being torn down or anything like that. I couldn't detect any odors. I didn't see any burns or any vegetation scorched or anything like that. So I went back to the car and I said, well, we may as well leave because he's not here. So I decided it was really no real sense into widening out my area of search at that moment, because I had a lot of people I could get there real soon to do that. Ken Copeland and I stayed out there that night in the back of a pickup truck. All night.
Waiting for the craft?
We were just waiting to see what happened.
Sheriff Gillespie pulled together a volunteer crew to join his officers on a daybreak search beginning the next morning. Fire and rescue people from the town, no family members or friends were turned down if they wanted to join the team. This was the beginning of a massive 4-day search that made the national news and then the international news.
The next morning, the sheriff and some of the other guys and all of the people that we had called, and the Forest Service brought a helicopter out there, and we had people with dogs, we had people on horses, and I think there was some people on 3-wheelers or whatever.
The sheriff, I don't know where he got all the people, but he got a whole bunch of people out there, and there was Forest Service people, and there was search and rescue people, just common people, and there was the government people, and the sheriff's department. You know, there was like 4 different categories of people that were there. Each one of them had like 25 guys.
You got to understand the police motives and attitudes when they're working. It's not to be suspicious-minded. It's not to make wild guesses. What it is to pinpoint what we're going to do and what we're looking for, and stay away from all of this other stuff because it's distracting.
They split us up. They had a deputy with each group.
I got up in the back of a pickup truck and yelled, and everybody came over, and I said, this is what I want. I want everyone who is in the dog business here to see if you can get a scent somewhere of something that Travis had, or maybe out of the pickup or something. I want you to go to the scene and see if any of those dogs can pick up a scent and trail. The rest of you, I want to start in this area, and I want you to start making a circular search for any footprints or any sign of anyone walking on this ground or anyone leaving on any kind of a vehicle or anything like that. I want that. If you find that, I want to know.
Just follow where the evidence takes you. Always follow the evidence. And no matter where it leads you to, no matter what kind of an outcome or result, whether you like the outcome or not, you will always stay credible if you follow the evidence. And so I can understand where law enforcement will say, well, we have to follow the evidence that's available to us or what's presented to us.
I said, the rest of you, you start going through these brush piles, because I want to know if there's anything in those brush piles that might resemble a body. And so the search started.
And the whole time the deputies asked me, and telling me, well, if you just tell us where the body is and what you did with Travis, we can all go home and get this over with,
You got to look at what you have been told. And I looked at that. They could have had a fight, and this could have ended up in a disaster.
He wasn't looking for a live person. He was looking for a dead body out there, that deputy, and all day long I listened. I didn't go back out after that day. I wasn't gonna, I didn't kill him. I knew none of those guys killed him, and I just wasn't gonna stand there and listen to it anymore,
They combed the hills, really seriously did. They, more than once. I don't think there was a place within 10 miles of that place, especially by the second day, where you couldn't find a footprint anywhere you went.
With over 100 people searching for Travis Walton for 5 days, news of his disappearance spread like wildfire.
Second day there was over 100. And Travis's mom told them that she didn't think there was any point in searching anymore. So
she probably didn't get any sleep for about 3 days. There was a lot of turmoil. I mean, there was absolutely no privacy. People looking through the windows at her home. News bureaus parked out in the front yard.
Especially in a Mormon town of 3,000, where everyone grew up knowing everybody else. Even the idea of it possibly being a UFO abduction was widespread in people's minds, whether they believed it or not. And within a short time, the phone in the Walton home was ringing off the hook.
My brother Dwayne, he was called by the multimedia worldwide from Europe, Australia, Japan, Italy. They rang constantly. And I'm not talking an hour or two between phone calls. I'm talking every few minutes. And well, we eventually just disconnected the phones because of, this was hard on the family. It was a roller coaster ride, just so many different emotions, Here I'm wanting to believe that it's a UFO.
It would not surprise me that a homicide investigation would have begun, because that's certainly the law of the land. It's the mindset of all law enforcement. No matter what the initial story is that people will say to you that they just witnessed or were involved with, there's another thing that has to kind of click in to say, well, maybe they're not telling me the truth. Maybe we should kind of look at it from a different point of view.
The days proceeded on, and the helicopter went around, and people expanded, and we never found a footprint or a sign anywhere of Travis Walton. There was others there who was asking me questions all the time. Is this a hoax? And I said, sir, I'm not here to determine if this is a hoax. I'm here to determine if law has been broken. If I just get up on the back of a truck and say, we're going to look for a bloody mess here somewhere, then that gets in people's minds and it distracts from what we're really trying to do. As a police officer, if you don't have enough sense to realize what people are going to do because you don't know nothing about human nature then, and you're going to let human nature get involved into the thing, and human nature is not what you need in an investigation.
He didn't believe anything. He was just skeptical, period. And I heard later that he didn't even believe that we were genuine that night, what we were saying. As a matter of fact, I got the opinion that he was a UFO believer. And in fact, I think he was at that point. I think peer pressure got to him.
If somebody is out here that's reportedly missing, I need to find that person. I ain't going into whether this is a hoax or not, so let's just don't even discuss it. Well, a lot of people had a lot to say to the brothers and the other boys that was there.
There was a lot of people that were very upset, telling a story that basically attacked them personally, their religious beliefs, that they didn't believe in UFOs and they thought this was just an attack on their religion. And so there was some very heated times.
I wanted to be supportive at the time, but I had my doubts. I was terrified. These guys like to, like good friends do, they liked karate and stuff like that. And they'd get out and do these, what they used to do, dancing duels, kind of things, and they're just a bunch of big kids. And I thought maybe they got to playing with chainsaws and that there was a horrible accident.
Yeah, we discussed that. It was discussed that they could have got into a fight and maybe one of them, maybe they're goofing off with a chainsaw or something and killed each other, or one of them killed the other. Whenever we were deciding what to do and what we might find out, this is all if. You can't put a statement like that into effect and say, this is what we will find. You can't do that. But we were saying, if they had got into a fight and were goofing around and one of them killed one of them accidentally or maybe, and they got afraid and hid him in one of these brush piles and then concocted this story to fix it.
As the search continued on over the days, individual members of the crew were kept under the watchful eye of individual police officers in the certain search groups. The idea being that perhaps one of them would finally give up the secret that they had killed Travis, accidentally or otherwise, and buried his body. Ultimately, the men decided the only thing they could do as a group was agree unanimously to take a lie detector test individually to prove their innocence.
I don't know whose idea that was. I know Dwayne Walton, Travis's brother, was telling these guys, you know, if you don't believe it, give them sodium pentothal. He wasn't saying lie detector test. He was talking about some more serious stuff, you know. But it might be that he's the one that sparked their interest in that. And I don't think they needed anybody to tell them. I think it's one of they do that in course. They would naturally do that.
The one thing that caused me to start believing was Kenny Peterson. Kenny Peterson, I've known since he was in high school. That is a man, he couldn't lie. He would not lie. If he had a mouth full of something, he wouldn't tell you what it was. He would not put the word out there. I've never even heard a single swear word from him. And he was just a great all-around young man. His mom must have really been proud of him. Kenny was a good guy.
But the 5 who did complete the test indicated that they were being truthful. There was no evidence of deception. But it would be extraordinarily difficult for 5 people initially to pass that test. Eventually, the 6th did take the test and pass, and Travis was missing for 5 full days. And he was being sought after by law enforcement, by individuals who are out in those woods searching for him in November of the year when he would have frozen to death in that environment.
And so way late in the evening, I guess sometime near midnight, I got a call. And the phone company said, we need you to go down to the phone booth in Heber because Travis was just there not long ago and made a phone call. And we have the conversations and all that. And we need to get a fingerprint to confirm that he really was there. And I said, well, if you've got it, he was there. Well, no, go down there and see if you can get a fingerprint. And I said, okay. So I went down there and it had been snowing and it was wet and the moisture and fingerprints won't work. And I couldn't lift prints. So we just quit.
They were probably all as equally surprised when Travis showed up, but then that opened up another box of questions like, well, what happened to him and who do we believe now? Do we believe his story now? And is his story still going to gel with his friends who are out there? And why would he have pulled such an elaborate ruse or hoax?
What can we deduce from what we know about this incident? All of the men involved passed polygraph tests, were observed by Sheriff Gillespie to seemingly be completely sincere in how insistent they were of what they observed. There is no question about the fact that Travis Walton was missing for 5 days. When he returned, he was disoriented, in shock, dehydrated. We know that there were physiological changes to the trees, to the soil in the area. Nothing that could be the result of a fabrication or a lie. We know from Travis's hypnotic regression that there were two kinds of beings on board the craft, for lack of a more accurate or descriptive term. One more the descriptions we have of so-called grays, the other's extremely humanoid in appearance. What can we deduce about this?
What is most important about Travis's event is not that he is a contactee, which technically he is, like perhaps millions of others. But this event, because it is well known and because there were witnesses, has it's been possible to examine it and come to conclusions which are highly significant. And that is that it was a one-time event. He was harmed inadvertently, not intentionally. He was taken to repair the damage, and that it took several days to do that. And when he was returned, he was probably in better health, possibly with an enhanced brain capacity. And that is critical because it shows in the instance of these extraterrestrials, they're an example of at least that group of entities' relationship to their work here. They didn't bring the hammer down on him. The local authorities generally raised all the various questions and lie detector tests were given. But I think they saw that while this case was going to get publicized, there was enough internal controversy, plus it was a rural community, grounded, people that are basic people. They didn't ultimately, I think, see it as a serious threat.
I consider Travis Walton's case to be one of the most credible close encounters of the third kind, and I don't even know what to call it in terms of an abduction. I wouldn't call it an abduction, but I don't consider Travis's case to be an abduction. I think it was wrong place, wrong time. Yeah. And I think more of a recovery, and if you look at where they picked him up and where they actually dropped him off, had they dropped him off in the same place they picked him up, he would have died. And they did it in a valley right out on the outskirts of town just so they could be out of sight. I mean, it was like these people thought about it very carefully about his well-being. It was just a phenomenal story. And Travis Walton didn't have a choice. He was famous by the time he resurfaced 5 days later,
Anything like that is important because there are plenty of people that are willing to concoct all kinds of awful scenarios regarding extraterrestrial presence. And some evidence that the extraterrestrials can be nasty when they want to. So a confirmed case of something like this is non-trivial. Now, it would be great if we had 150 more, but we do, to some degree, have more examples of this. We have cases of contactees which have stated quite clearly that they were taken as part of a regular program, and in one instance, they went up with a serious medical problem, and when they came back, it was gone.
Travis's case brought me to, I feel that he believes what he saw is the truth. And if I believe he's telling the truth, then there has to be something to this. And if it could happen to Travis and he could see and experience these things, I have to be open to the possibility that there are others. You just have to be.
There's something going on, and yet it's being hidden from us. Do people just not care? I think it's significant.
So it's time we get this topic out in the open. We address it, we accept it, and we study it so we can move forward and not only find out who's driving these things, but also move forward in our own evolution.
And I actually have concerns that if these abduction stories are true, and I don't believe that they can't all be made up or dreams or hallucinations or hoaxes, if enough of them are true, then what really is going on here? And part of that may be the reason why we're not being told.
We don't have a reference for these kinds of phenomena because we're told they're not real.
But there are, by some estimates, as many as 6 to 7 million other American citizens that are dealing with ETs, whether they remember it or not. Ultimately, it will be the weight of all of those contacts which will add and contribute mightily to finally evening this playing field and giving us the truth from the government that we demand.
At the end of the day, who has the information? It's not our elected representatives, I'll tell you that much.
You have a scale, and on one side of the scale, very heavily weighed down, is the government's truth embargo, its resources, its power, its authority, and everything else. And over 60 years, citizen scientists, activists have been adding little weights to the other scale. And one day, the amount of weight on the other side is going to lift it up, and they will be equal, and the truth embargo will end.
I had an opportunity to talk to a few congressmen, both Republicans and Democrats, and they said the only way it would ever happen to have congressional hearings on the subject of UFOs is if enough of our cages were rattled by our constituents, and then and only then would they consider having that. I mean, they would never put their necks out otherwise.
So there's this disconnect, this massive reality that people are seeing and that people are experiencing, and that is affecting them deeply, and they're not able to talk about it. Why? Because they get ridiculed. Because there are obviously things in place in our power structure that are preventing this from getting out, whether it's in the major media, whether it's in the academic community, all right, all of which are a lot easier to manage than people often realize.
Well, I have to say that popular culture and formal education did allow for the scientific study of UFOs by highly credentialed scientists until the mid to late 1960s, when the Condon Committee met to evaluate a number of cases. This was allegedly the scientific study of UFOs, but we all know that it was not, because the trick memo was discovered by Dr. David Saunders, and the trick memo stated that this was an embarrassment, that it was not acceptable to study UFOs.
The truth embargo, in terms of academics, in terms of the press, in terms of most of the general public, and most was essentially institutionalized by '91. After 44 years, it was just the way it was. It was like the sky is blue.
The academic funding was shifted from the scientific study of the physical evidence to the social science study of individuals who believed they saw UFOs, and eventually to people who believe that they were abducted by non-human entities. Very, very important here, because prior to this, in the early to mid-60s, there were some prestigious peer-reviewed journals that contained some articles about the physical evidence. After that recommendation was made, the funding did shift to social science, and any studies after that were published in psychological journals.
I mean, think about how this works. If it were the 1950s and 60s and you were some professor or some teacher at a small college or university and you become interested in UFOs, what would happen? You write an article or two about it, and the big shot over at Harvard University, Donald Menzel, who unbeknownst to you is connected with the NSA, he smacks you down. Who's going to fight Donald Menzel in the 1950s? Answer, basically no one.
I've had graduate students call me up and say they want to do a dissertation on UFOs or abductions. And I want them to do that dissertation. I want them to do it. My advice to them is, stay the hell away from it. Do not write a dissertation unless it's the standard dissertation about UFOs, UFO religions, the sociology of UFO groups. It doesn't have anything to do with the subject itself. It's got to do with okay, then you can do it. But if you're going to study the phenomenon itself, you'll never get a job in academics. That is guaranteed.
So it wasn't the government had to keep sending out emails or intimidating people, though I think some of that did go on through '99. They could step back, which cut their wrists somewhat, and simply allow the institutionalized embargo to go forward in its own momentum. And that's the way it's been since 2000.
And if you want to do abduction work, that's even more important to wait and not to tell anybody. I hate to say that, but I know that I will be destroying that person's life if I say, oh yes, do it, oh that'll be wonderful. I can't do that. It's a life destroyer.
It's entirely possible that our government or the governments of the world don't know. This is a very complex issue. It's been going on for a long time.
The older the researcher, it seems like the less they feel we're on a brink. And I think because they've been living with the brink for decades. And so you ask a lot of researchers, and you know, I used to feel when I got into this, it feels like we're in the brink, it's right around the corner. And I asked a lot of researchers, especially John Schuessler was one of those. He's like, well, we thought we were in the brink in the 70s with Carter. We thought we were in the brink when Reagan started talking about this stuff, or when Close Encounters came out. And he said, there's so many times that eventually you feel like there aren't any brinks. And there is some sort of interface with these enigmatic things, these things that we can't understand, that are beyond us, but more intelligent than us, and they move us in a certain ways. I mean, Jacques Vallée is one of those people who is always offering, a lot of people get frustrated with his idea, no, these are extraterrestrials, and he's quick to say, we don't know what's going on. But that people have been experiencing these things for thousands of years.
So the idea that just consider somebody who's maybe only 500 years or 1,000 years more advanced than we are technologically. Imagine what we will be doing 1,000 years from now, where we will be able to go. Will we have to rely on fossil fuels to get somewhere? Probably not. But because we don't know how to do it now, that means nobody else is doing it. And that for me is a problem. What limited data that we have so far suggests that we are being visited by 3 or 4 different groups of aliens at different stages of development. And there is some evidence to support that. UFO activity has been going on this planet for over 50,000 years. We're at a point now, historically, where you will not find very many astronomers who will say that we're not alone. Okay, you know, they know now, thanks to 2 lovely spacecraft, the Hubble Space Telescope and the little Kepler. You know, these 2 instruments have brought us closer and closer to what's really going on around us. What about the fact that there are so many reliable, credible people like airline pilots, military pilots, even people in the government, even other scientists who say something's landing in people's backyards and we don't know what it is or where they come from? How do you respond to that? And he very simply said, well, none of us have actually seen any verifiable evidence. And I said to Frank, have you spent any personal time? Have you done any legwork? Have you looked at previously classified military and government documents? Have you spoken to anyone in the military about the fact that they've chased some of these objects that outperform, outmaneuver anything that we have? Have you talked with these people? And he said, no, we're very busy at SETI. You know, we're very concentrated on finding a signal. And I said, so you want to find a signal in which we can assume that it's an intelligent signal, and we can use our radio telescopes to maybe say hi, and then have to wait maybe another generation before someone says hi back to us. Is that worth the effort instead of trying to say hi to someone who's already here?
Good. Okay, we are going to now begin our investigator panel. And I'd like to introduce these 6 people who have taken an incredible look at many different angles of this case we're talking about today, the Travis Walton case. So here's who we have. We have Ray Jordan, who's the field investigator for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, who at that time was the largest civilian UFO investigation organization in the country. And we have Lee Spiegel, who's an award-winning writer, reporter, and paranormal expert who's covered UFOs and science for 50 years. And he also helped with the Travis documentary. John Budrys is an investigator of MUFON who got heavily involved in this case, working with Jennifer Stein, helping her with the background research for her documentary. Ray Szymanski's coming on. He's an author researcher who's looked at different aspects of this case and some of the forensic analysis. Dr. Bruce Cornet, who has a lengthy and acclaimed scientific background as a PhD biologist. Also, we have Gary Halloway. Gary is also very familiar with this case. He's a friend of Travis and Mike Rogers, and even is knowledgeable on the tree growth, and is a professional drone operator who shot some of the drone footage that we'll be seeing in her documentary. Okay, why don't we start with you, Ray Jordan, if that's okay. Let's go back to 1975. You were part of the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, and you were the first non-law enforcement investigator on the scene. Travis, at this point, is still missing. Can you tell us what the mood was like in that town, Ray?
Well, I was standing out on Mike Rogers' porch there after they came back, and the crew was all excited. I mean, obviously, I was just trying to be a fly on the wall and observe and just pay attention to what was going on. And they were very excited. And that's when I found out that that there would be a polygraph test on the 10th. And I just made sure I was there. So and that gave me an opportunity to well, anyway, the sheriff, Marlon Gillespie, told me before the polygraph testing started, I was sitting there with the crew waiting, and he told me not to talk to anything before or after, but I really didn't think he had any authority to tell me that. So while we were waiting, I took some of them across the street to a diner and got them a Coke and hamburger and got their stories on tape and sketches. And it was very obvious from the excitement that something really had happened.
Interesting. What was the mood like when they were waiting to get the polygraph? You were right there with them. That's incredible. What was that like?
Well, it's, I was just talking to them one at a time. Yeah, they were pretty excited. I was fascinated, with their descriptions, because I had never heard of an object that had panels or was faceted. And one of them even described a dome, the others did not. So it was a pretty exciting time. I mean, it was worldwide news at that time, so the phone was ringing off the hook there at the sheriff's office in Holbrook.
Ray, do you feel that all these years later that this was a legitimate case?
Oh, I never felt it wasn't. Yes.
I mean, you sort of hit the home run here in 1975, getting called out to this UFO sighting, and then it turns out to be the Travis Walton case, which is one of the biggest, most investigated cases in history. I just want to know what it was like in that town at that time. What did you feel? Was it energy? Were people all talking about it? Were people scared? What was the mood?
Well, I wasn't involved with the town people. I just hung around with the crew, observing them. Gotcha. So I don't know anything about the people there.
But you trusted and believed all the crew members at the time, right?
I had no reason to doubt them.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk to Lee Spiegel for a second. Thank you, Ray. Lee, you spent decades researching paranormal and UFO cases. What are your thoughts about this Travis Walton case?
Well, When I first heard about it, by the way, hello, Captain Ron. Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you, sir.
uh, it was so weird for me because in November of 1975, when this story hit, I don't think it took very long for it to actually hit the media after Travis was reported missing. So I believe it was probably within a few days that I and many other people heard about it. And my response was, oh my God, geez, because 7 months prior to this, in April of 1975, I was in North Carolina at the request of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer. He had called me and asked if I would go to North Carolina to investigate for him a series of unusual UFO reports and sightings by mostly law enforcement officials in Lumberton, North Carolina. And I remember asking him, well, what are they reporting? And I should say, the reason why Dr. Hynek asked me to go was because I was in the middle of producing a UFO documentary vinyl spoken word record for CBS called UFOs, The Credibility Factor. And Dr. Hynek was one of the people on my record. So we had become friends back then. So he knew I was working on that production. And he called and asked if I had time to go to North Carolina and just investigate what people were seeing, do some interviews with police officers, sheriff's deputies, highway patrolmen, and submit a report to him at the Center for UFO Studies. And then he would publish my report. So when I asked him, well, what are they reporting to you? He said, well, here in 1975, it's something a little unusual. It's a V or a V-shaped or boomerang shaped or triangular shaped craft. We haven't heard very much about that. And I said, well, wait a minute now. You're asking me to go to North Carolina to investigate a flying Dorito, essentially? And I said, you know, I've always really wished that I could see an actual flying saucer with a dome on top or something like that. And he said, look, if you don't want to go, and I said, no, stop, don't finish that thought. You're the last person on earth I want to piss off right now.
Right.
I'm going. And so I never could have imagined that I would find myself involved in a situation where I was standing in a field surrounded by sheriff's people, highway patrolmen, some police officers, many eyewitnesses, and this thing came across the field, hovered above us, and the most dramatic moment was when it shot a beam of light out of the apex of it, right down onto the ground, right in front of where we were standing. Wow. And I could not have imagined that 7 months later, a man named Travis Walton was going to be hit by a beam of light coming out of an unusual craft.
That is
who thinks of things like that, right?
Incredible.
You know, I can only imagine what he and his friends, the loggers, were feeling, because for me and the other people I was surrounded by, my heart was pumping so fast and hard. It was a combination of total fear, because it was the unknown that we were experiencing, and total excitement. I was fascinated. I remember thinking I was pretty safe because I was surrounded by guys with their 6-shooters. and then I thought, well, wait a minute, just how safe do I feel? Because if whatever this thing is wants to take us away and that we might never, ever be heard from again, well, that's it. That's the ball game. So you don't know, except for the fear that you're feeling. And now here we are so many years later. I can only imagine what Travis and the others were feeling. I could only imagine what in 1961, Barney and Betty Hill were feeling in New Hampshire when they were experiencing something like this. And their case, for me and many others, kind of set the bar on these types of cases. And then moving forward, I think the next real credible case after theirs was, of course, the Travis Walton case, because there's so many aspects of it. And I've known Travis for many years. I've always felt that he's very reliable, very credible. He hasn't, as far as I know, he hasn't swayed from the original story that he told. And you know, people will say, well, over many years, you might tend to make things up. Well, no, you don't have to make anything up. Years after my 1975 encounter with the triangle and the beam of light, I was at a MUFON conference in Southern California, and I met up with Robert Schaefer, one of the leading skeptics debunkers. I'm sure we're all familiar with Robert. And first of all, I ran into him in the vendor's room at this conference, and I said, Robert, what are you doing here? And he said to me, well, I'm not allowed to be at a UFO conference, even though I'm a debunker. And I said, you know what? You're right. I apologize. I was completely wrong. And so we started talking, and I said to him, you know, Robert, I've been meaning to ask a leading debunker about something that happened to me in 1975, just 7 months before the Travis Walton case. And if you've got a few minutes, let's go find some place to sit quiet. I would like to tell you the story, what happened to me and a lot of law enforcement officials. I told them the story. And at the end of it, I said, no, I want to know, no matter what you think, what did we see in 1975? Was there something otherworldly? Was there some kind of a test vehicle that nobody seemed to have in 1975? And he said to me, well, if you haven't changed the details of your story after all these years. And I said, no, when something like that happens to you, it's so embedded in your mind for all time. Why forget it, or why make up new details about it to make it seem even more incredible? So no, it's as I told it to you. And he said, well, the only thing that I can consider that you saw was, now, are you all sitting? Okay.
Yep.
He said, it could have been a remote controlled kite. I think I looked at him just like this. Well, really? Remote controlled kite? Okay, 1975, that could come across a field, that could stop, that could hover, that made no sound, that could shoot a beam of light down directly in front of where we were, that suddenly the beam went back up, the thing turned an amber color and moved away, and had its own close encounter with other police officers in the area. Remote controlled kite? You know, with all due respect, Robert, I don't think so.
Unbelievable how they just won't even try to accept it. It's
whether it's the thing that I experienced, or Barney and Betty Hill, or of course Travis, every time my late friend, our late friend, Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist, would give a lecture somewhere, he would always say a variety of things that I never forgot to every audience. He would say, the debunkers of the world of UFOs, they have a particular mantra that they live by. And the mantra is, don't bother me with the facts. My mind is already made up.
That's right.
I mean, there it is.
A lot of people feel that way.
Unscientific is that?
Not just debunkers, Lee. Don't you think just regular folks in the world, I think, feel that way?
Yeah. Yes. Because again, the regular folks in the world, they don't want to know about this stuff, basically. They don't want something that will interfere in their daily lives, for themselves, for their families, for their jobs. They would much rather experience these kinds of stories in a movie theater, or in a book, or in a documentary, like Jennifer Stein's great Travis documentary. They don't want to know that it actually is something that's occurring. We have people now all around the world. There's a whole new subculture of experiencers, is what we know them to be called now. People who have this abduction experience. Now, I'm very careful not to assume that what we're talking about is extraterrestrial. I don't care who these beings are or where they come from, how they got here. I don't care about that. I care about the fact that somebody is doing this to citizens of this planet.
Exactly.
And people want answers. I'm sure Travis still wants answers after all these years. And we're at a point now, as we all know, in recent times, now finally our government and other governments of the world, they're starting to admit that there's something operating in our skies all over the planet that outperforms, outmaneuvers any aircraft we have, especially our most sophisticated jet fighters. And we don't know what these things are. They're actually saying this now. They're admitting this, like last June with that unclassified report that the government finally came out with. They actually said, well, these objects are real. To actually see this in print, to hear them saying these are real objects.
And it only took 75 years, Lee, so not too bad.
I know. I mean, like what, 1947, when General Nathan Twining wrote that famous memo in which he said to the Air Materiel Command, these are objects, these are real objects. It's a real phenomenon. And we need to figure out what these things are. And so only now, after decades of the Air Force and the government saying, there's nothing going on here, there's nothing of any scientific interest, nothing that could affect national security, and certainly nothing that we would consider as extraterrestrial. So please go about your daily lives. We're going to close this thing called Project Blue Book because we don't think we need to investigate this anymore. Well, now all of a sudden that's changed. And in the last few years, with the Navy coming forward, where's the Air Force? Why are they keeping silent? They're basically saying, you know what? We had our say for several decades. Let's let the Navy deal with it now. That's really kind of what it feels like, because too many times the Air Force ended up having egg all over its face over this subject. And they don't want that anymore. Let them deal with other things. So now it's in the hands of the Navy. And boy, have they come forward with a lot of really interesting stuff. But the one thing they haven't really said is, we have some evidence that this is otherworldly. This is not coming from our planet. It's not the Russians. It's not the Chinese. No, they don't have this technology, because I keep saying to people, who had this technology in 1947? Did anybody on our planet have this? No. I like to keep things really simple and not try and just over embellish stuff. No, keep it simple. Who had it back in the days of the Bible, when humans were seeing things coming out of the skies and they were writing about it in the terms that they could only understand? Oh, it looks like a wheel because we have things that we drive around in wheels. It must be a wheel within a wheel. Wasn't that the great Ezekiel? The prophet?
Yeah. Yep. The Bible.
Okay.
Yep.
We always tend to explain things given the terms that we know. I mean, we need to keep this simple. I know I've gone on probably too long here, but I get so crazy about when people try to put it down, try to put eyewitnesses down. Skeptics and debunkers will say, I've heard many of them say that airline pilots make the worst kind of eyewitnesses. Really? Why is that? Well, because they're supposed to be really busy in the cockpit, paying attention to other things. They can't really spend the time wondering what that circular or cigar-shaped thing is that's approaching them at high speed. I mean, really, they can't really tell what's going on. Please, everybody, I beg everybody, not you guys here, not all of us, but keep it simple.
Yep.
Because we don't know what's going on. And I'm concerned that it's possible that the governments of the world don't know the entire story, and maybe they're not sure how to break it to us. That's entirely a possibility. There you go, from me.
Awesome, Lee. Let's talk to John for a second. John, how can you share with us how you got involved in researching this and what sort of things you uncovered looking at this case?
Wow. I've known Jennifer for a little while from her I first heard her talk at the Phoenix conference. She gave a crop circle presentation, which I really thought was the best presentation, the most scientific, fact-oriented presentation I'd ever heard. And I became an admirer of hers after that. Happened to meet her at the 2000, I think it was 19 Phoenix conference. I was having a drink at the bar with Kathleen Martin, and Jennifer strolled by and said hello to Kathleen. And I went, "You're Jennifer Stein? Oh my God." Well, then this Travis controversy came up. She was on a panel with Peter Robbins and Kathleen Martin. And again, she gave, I think, the most fact-oriented spiel during that presentation. And I wrote her an email and said, again, you've, hit the ball out of the park, as far as, being fact-oriented. And she wrote back, and I'm a wordsmith. I'm kind of known for that. And I noticed she had some misspellings in that. So she was writing a document that she wanted to maybe send out. And she said, "What do you think, John?" And I wordsmithed it for her. I sent it back and I said, "I hope you don't mind." "No, this is great." I said, "Be willing to help you if you want to, develop this further." And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I think we're up to 120 pages now. I mean, it's book sized. But it's been a pleasure working with her. She's, again, hit the ball out of the park with throwing a lot of facts at these armchair skeptics. I've learned a lot about the Travis case. I've helped her with a little bit of research. She's asked me to look into some specific areas, most notably perhaps is it possible that that Travis hid out in the fire tower, which she calls them even in her document, the skeptic, armchair skeptic, I must add. And I talked to people at the fire tower. I called them up. I talked to several. The last person I talked to, I guess, was kind of a little intrigued in the story and my inquiry on it. And when I talked to her next time, she said, "It's funny. The guy that was the supervisor of that tower just happened to come in. He's retired now. He happened to come in to get a firewood permit." And I asked him about that Travis thing. Is it possible that Travis could have hidden in the tower during those 5 days? And the supervisor said, "I distinctly remember that. Because it was a big event." And he said, because of we were concerned about this guy possibly being lost in the woods, injured or something. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I had an employee that next day go up in the tower and look around to see if he might see Travis. Now I said, "Well, how big is this enclosure at the top of the tower?" Well, first of all, it's about 70 steps up there. The thing was about 14 by 14. I said, "What's up there? Is there a bathroom? Are there rooms? Are a lot of furniture?" They said, "There's a desk there and a chair and a radio." I said, "So there's not a lot of places for Travis to have hid. Like maybe he could have hid under the desk. But this guy's up there looking around for Travis in binoculars or something for 8 hours. That'd be awful hard to be crouched up under the desk, holding your bladder the entire time and trying not to make any noise. That's ridiculous. I mean,
yeah. There's been a lot of ridiculous claims thrown at this case over.
Yeah, a lot of armchair stuff. I asked her about the light. Was there a light that they communicated with? Just Morse code signals. She said they got a 60-watt bulb up there, guy. And I said, "How is this thing powered? Do they have electricity coming up to it? Do they have a bathroom up there?" They said, "No, the Rangers have a generator that they have to start down below, 70 stairs down, start this generator to give themselves some electricity to power their radio and their 60-watt bulb." And I think, well, wait a minute, somebody had a generator going there. That would make a racket. You wouldn't be able for that. And then, no electricity other than the generator. So where's this light come from that this armchair skeptic, said was beamed around?
Hey, John, it's also quite far from where the incident took place.
Oh, yeah. Jennifer pointed out, she's got her facts lined up really nicely. I hope she comes out with this. I hope it's a book. I really do. But she did a drone thing, and it's like 3.4, 9 miles away from the
2.9, yep.
two spots they were at. You can't even see it with a drone. So, I mean, how could these guys that are familiar with these towers know this? So
it's ridiculous.
There's one other thing. I hope the lady called Phyllis Bundinger, I think I've misbutchered her name, but I know her. She's from Ohio. I'm from Michigan, and I've worked with her. I'm part of the ERT also, so I talk to abductees a lot. In fact, I've got a call scheduled later today or tomorrow at least. And she noted she's got some health problems. She's really busy, but she did write something back to Jennifer, which Jennifer sent me a copy of, saying that she'd gotten some magnetic readings and also compass readings there. I know from my own landing site investigations that there's something funny about a compass. I've got some real nice EMF meters and Geiger counters and that, but sometimes it's just a compass that reacts. I was at a landing site one time. Every time I walked past the flattened weeds, there were like 2 concentric rings of flattened weeds. Every time I walked over that concentric section, the compass needle deflected 30 degrees to the west. Every time. It was repeatable. There's something about a compass that picks up whatever the aliens leave, whatever energies in addition to whatever made the trees grow a little bit more. I call it a miracle grow energy, versus radiation, but there's something positive that comes from these. But the compass that Phyllis noted was the same sort of device I find reacts most easily to whatever residuals are there.
Like Lee said, keep it simple. This is one of the most incredible facets of the case is the amount of evidence that we have. We have 7 direct eyewitnesses, in a multi-witness case. We have 7 guys all passing multiple polygraph tests. We have all these witnesses sticking to their original story 46 years later. There were other witnesses to this craft as well, as we'll get to later in the day, that also saw the craft from a distance. But there's also some physical evidence from down on the ground, including the tree growth and some soil anomalies. Let's take a look at link 2 real quick, and let's all watch this video. It's real short, 2.5 minutes. Ray, do you have your video? I think, Ray, you have some video about the tree growth. Do you have yours ready to go, Ray?
I do. I have a couple of things. I'd like to do a short intro if I could, because
go right ahead.
I'm really the junior member here. Most of these people, are legends in the field. And so I know of most of them. My claim to fame is I worked for nearly 40 years at the legendary Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as a senior engineer. And the very first week I was there, my mentor asked me, "Have you heard about our aliens?" And from that point forward, I was kind of interested in asking anybody and everybody, what was he talking about? And so I had a chance to snoop around not only Wright-Patterson for nearly 40 years, and I still do it today, but other places that I traveled on behalf of the Air Force. And there was enough smoke and fire that I became really interested in it. But in 2015, I met Jennifer Stein at the International UFO Congress that was being held in Fountain Hills. So she had heard that I was going to head up to Heber and do a little bit of Travis Walton research, because I was merely a UFO tourist at that point. But, having heard all of those stories, all those years at Wright-Pat, and gotten a lot of evidence that, there was something true about UFOs and extraterrestrials and materials being brought to the base, I was now in like my 2nd decade of doing some field research to prove just to myself that all the things that I had heard on the base were indeed true, that there was some basis for those things that people kept telling me while I was there. So I had met Jen, and she heard that I was going to Heber to do some of my own personal research. And she said, "Hey, well, I can help you with that. I know somebody who might be able to take you to Travis's site." And I said, "Well, that'd be great. Who is it?" And the next thing I hear, Jen is going, "Hey, Travis, get over here." And we were all at a dinner together. So Travis comes over, she does the introduction. My mind is blowing. And she made an arrangement for Travis and I to go up to his site. And what she needed from me is to take some professional quality photographs of some of the tree stumps, just take some stills, and that Travis would be my guide and he would show me what to take and that sort of thing. So I had a Canon 20D at the time, so it's a fairly high quality camera. And our mission that day with Travis and myself was to locate those trees and to take photos of those that showed signs of anomalous growth, hopefully in the direction of the hovering flying saucer. So what I have is, you know, here I am, you know, I've got the most famous experiencer ever in my rental car. We just spent an hour slip sliding over 4 inches of mud to go up that hill. We stopped to photograph some wild horses, and that's another story. So, you know, we get to the site and it just clicks. I've got my camera, but I don't have any video equipment except my cell phone. And I say to Travis, hey, Travis, let's document what this is all about. And I have a 30-second clip. And there's a little bit of wind in there because it was windy, it was cold, it was late February, but I think there's enough content in there which will firmly cement the reason that Travis and I were up there this day. So I'm going to do a share screen, and I am going to get to this guy. I'm going to share the sound as Victoria has trained me to do. I will share this. And we will go back. There's just a little bit of video here. And can you tell me, Travis, while we're on, what we're going to be looking at?
Well, this tree right here shows thickened growth on this side, pointing this direction. It's minimal on the back side. So all of the accelerated growth is in one direction.
And that accelerated growth would be where the craft landed?
Yeah, in the direction where the craft landed.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll go grab it. So what we did is we took photographs that day, and I'm going to share one more screen. It's a PowerPoint slide. We went around and we shot these photos, and there were maybe a dozen trees that were indicative of this growth. But when I got the pictures back and I analyzed them, I looked at them, there were really only 3 that had the physical integrity after all these years, where you look at them and it's very clear cut. You don't have to use any imagination to say, well, yeah, it's possible that there's a lobe here. The 3 trees you're going to see are plotted in the vicinity of the event, and you'll get to see the trees and the rings themselves. A couple of these were actually samples were taken, and the gentleman mentioned Phyllis Buddinger. She had done a report that maybe we can discuss later if we have time. So let me share this other screen, and I'll let you know what we're looking at here. It doesn't require any sound, and I will do from current slide. What you're looking at in the upper right-hand corner is a aerial photograph, a portion of it that Jennifer lent to me. It was taken, it's in the Travis movie, and surrounding that are some tree stumps that I photographed, and I had some notes, and so I laid these out later on this aerial photograph. And the 3 trees here, they're numbered 2, 5, and 6. The blue circle is, let's just call it a waypoint, and the blue line extending upwards means it's in a northerly direction. So when I plotted the photographs, and you'll see a compass there, I had a compass for each photograph, it appears that there is accelerated growth on the north facing side of each of those 3 trees. And the alignment isn't perfect, and maybe my alignment in putting the pictures there was not perfect, but it's clearly indicative that the side of the trees facing a northerly direction, as if, you know, if you were to put your hand to the upper left, there was an object there, and those lobes are pointing towards whatever object was there. Okay, so Phyllis Buddinger did a report on those extended tree rings, And it was based on a project that Mike Rogers had actually done. He had gone up there and taken wedges out of the trees. He had given them to a Dr. Levengood, who eventually gave them to Phyllis. And she has all those tree stumps, did the ring counting, and noticed the same anomalies that I noticed with these photographs. So the data that I retrieved, and again, mine is not, I'm not claiming it's super scientific or anything. It's just the observations are clear, at least to me. And they corroborate, or I should say Phyllis's work corroborates what I did here with photographs.
Hey, Ray, let us play this real quick video. We have that clip with Jennifer and Ben Hansen, and they have similar things, and it's real easy for people to understand. Let's just play it real quick. It's 2.5 minutes. Can we play link 2, please?
It was really interesting to go back to the site and do some follow-up research. It was at that time that I discovered a directional effect of this rapid tree growth. I found one stump that had the thickened rings in the direction back towards where the craft had been. And then I started checking stumps at the 4 corners of the compass and discovered that there was a swelling and a thickening of the growth rings in the direction that the craft had been and not on its opposite side. That was where the thickness of the rings were at the minimum.
If you were to take a cross section of these trees and to see them from above, is that if this change and difference in tree growth were caused by something that was just the soil, maybe they had a bad year, a drought, or a good year of enriched soil, it should be uniformly distributed. But what we found in the samples that we took around the clearing is that it's not. In fact, if you go north or you go south, it's almost like the epicenter that we identified where the clearing was, it's drawing or pulling some effect.
It cannot be explained to where towards the center where the craft was the accentuated the effect of the growth rings on these trees. Ben's discovery that the pine trees in the Chernobyl region had tripled their growth rate in reaction to the exposure to radiation, that led to the idea that perhaps, you know, these trees were being irradiated from that direction and not from the backside of the tree.
Chernobyl, of course, in Russia, extreme radiation dispersed. And they found specifically in some types of trees, including the Scots pine tree, they found volume growth of up to 3 times the previous years before the incident. A mutation occurs and most of the cells die out. But because the radiation is causing such a stimulation of cell growth, it produces new cells quicker than the old ones are dying out. So our theory is to see if such radiation could have caused abnormal growth, not only in the trees surrounding the clearing, but could it also cause this directionality? That something from an epicenter would only cause half of the tree facing it to possibly grow faster than the rest of the tree.
In addition to the discovery of the stump of a tree that had been cut the previous year prior to the presence of the craft that had fairly uniform growth rings going back 200 years. So any speculation about random changes in growth conditions on that ridge just don't hold water when you have this tree going back 200 years.
Ray, that's a hell of a coincidence of 200 years, the consistent tree growth, and then suddenly, right when this happens, we have this directional pattern with the tree.
You know, again, I'm not a tree expert. I'm a electronics engineer, software engineer. No, that's my background. But I think anyone who looks at the photographs, and if they were to read Phyllis Buddinger's report, it's very consistent. So Travis's observation, Ben Hansen's observations, my photographs, Buddinger's report, they all coincide with each other. Now, what does that mean? I say that my data set is too small, you know, 3 trees that are definitive. It's just too small to make a scientific, you know, decision on. But I think when you collect all the evidence together, I think you could. And when I came on here, I knew I was going to come on this event. I would highly recommend that somebody else go back and do it all over again. Now, the day I was there with Travis, I didn't know what to expect. I'd have given my kingdom for a tree saw, because some of those tops were so degraded. And when we got up there, in fact, I had to lie to Travis. Well, it was a fib, actually. I called him and I said, Travis, where are you? And he said, well, yeah, it's snowing up there. And I lied. I go, no. And I'm looking out the window and it's snowing. My rental car is filled with snow. I go, Travis, it's a beautiful sunshine day. Yeah, you need to come up. We got to get this done. And when we got up to the forest, there was ice and snow on a lot of the trees. So we spent a lot of our time just chipping that away. So you can imagine through the decades that had happened between his event and our day, there was just a lot of destruction of those treetops. So clean cuts, maybe another look at it. I think there's enough evidence to justify somebody going back and doing it right, not just, you know, the UFO tourist thing like I had a chance to do back in 2015.
Right. I appreciate that, Ray. And I appreciate that you're not a tree guy, as you said. If only we had like a PhD biologist. Wait a second, folks. We do have a PhD biologist with us, Dr. Bruce Cornet. Bruce, you're here. Why don't you give us a take from a PhD biologist perspective on this tree growth?
Yes, I very much agree that the abnormal eccentric growth of these trees surrounding the area where the abduction occurred are indicative of some type of energy or radiation that affected them. And I think that a further research into this area, getting more samples if possible, and studying them will prove that something very unusual did happen there.
Did you get a chance to look at any of the soil samples in that area, Bruce?
No, I didn't. I've never been to that location.
Oh, you haven't? Okay, because I think there's some report that Jennifer has that we'll have to get to you and look at that. What aspects of this case, from your perspective, Bruce, do you think stand out evidence-wise?
Well, aside from the abduction memories that Travis has had, what information he has provided is consistent with what we know occurs in many abductions. And I tend to believe what he's saying because I've had similar experiences. Although my particular case back in 1981 was with my entire drill crew near Richmond, Virginia, in which a craft came and abducted me from the mudlogging trailer. And the crew saw me being abducted. They saw me taken. They found me missing. They saw me being brought back. And I was very confused when I was brought back, hypothermic, and thought I'd had a nightmare. And I couldn't believe what the crew were telling me, even though all of that was written down. It never involved the police, and it never involved a news lake. So nobody ever knew about this event, and except for me and those who were there.
Interesting. Hey, Gary, you have been to that location. Why don't you give us an idea of what it is like up there and what you saw when you investigated that area?
Okay. Thank you, Captain Ron, for inviting me on. I've been there several times in some of the absolute worst weather, so I know what Ray's talking about. I trudged through it, slid down hills, everything else. And I did recover, I brought a chainsaw and I recovered a bunch of the samples. I did send one to Jennifer. It's remote, it's cold. I mean, especially in the wintertime, it's very uncomfortable up there, you know, for any length of time. We've done sky watches up there with Ben Hansen before during some of Travis's event, and I was filming droning there also for a movie at the same time that was being done out of Hollywood for, I forget the name of it. They changed the name 2 or 3 times before they finally released it. But yeah, it's definitely remote, and as Ray was saying, a lot of rot has happened now. It was very powdery the first few cuts that I made, but we do have samples, and that are available right now.
Cool. Gary, it's different when you get to know someone a bit, right? Like I have been so fortunate enough to have the opportunity to get to know some people in different cases and in this field. And in a way, it's way different to talk to them as I get to know them and become friendly with them, as opposed to just having someone come on one of my shows cold. You know, you get a sense of talking to somebody man to man, if you will.
Right.
How does that sway your opinion in this case? Because you know these guys. Why don't you share that aspect of it to us?
Well, I know Travis real well outside of the UFO. We've spent a lot of time together just visiting about everything. We'll talk on the phone fairly often. We've traveled together. Our last trip that him and I took was up to Chaco Canyon, which just, you know, we went with Clifford Mahooty, and just I did some droning there. Just wanted to try to do some droning before they got too strict on, you know, national park droning. And you know, I've never had any indication ever that he has changed the story. Perhaps any changes that someone might mention would be simply maybe some revelations that he had about it. Like perhaps, you know, as time went on, as a man, you keep thinking about what happened, what is this, why me type thing, you know, and he just, you know, seems to have, you know, a little bit more resolved, and perhaps they weren't trying to harm him. They were rescuing him because he had got in this beam of light, you know, this beam of this power, whatever it was, that knocked him down. And I find the same thing with Mike. You know, one of the distinguishing things about this is Mike or any other guys, they don't claim to know, you know, Travis's story personally. They only claim that they seen a craft, they saw energy of some sort hit him, knock him down, they saw him missing. So Travis's story is his and his alone, in my opinion. This thing
In
is,
your opinion, this is a very important case that each of these guys, I've talked to all these guys, Steve, Mike Rogers, they all want to make it very clear to everyone out there that they don't know what happened to Travis after they left. They all stick to their story and claim seeing the UFO.
That's
However,
right.
they drove away, and the story that, like you're pointing out, Gary, is Travis's account and only Travis's account.
that's correct. And, you know, and they're not going to add to it. They can only speculate, you know, and this is as Travis experienced it, the way he's talking about it. There's a lot of reasons that, you know, people like to debunk these kind of things, but as you guys know, we got tons and tons of evidence, and Jennifer has researched the heck out of it very thoroughly. She put her heart and soul into making the documentary, and it's factual as far as I'm concerned. You know, not being there, of course, but it's still factual for all the interactions I've had with the people involved.
Listen, this is for anyone, maybe Lee, but guys, we've heard all your amazing credentials. Clearly, you guys are all well credentialed. Also, we've heard some scientific evidence, and we've heard personal opinions on this account. Why in the hell is it that this is not on CNN tonight and the most important story in the world? Why is it so hard, do you guys think, for people to accept this case or the UFO phenomenon in general?
Stigma. Just people hate to be branded, you know. There's more of us now, of course, that believe in this, but a lot of people, back to the airline pilots, I'm a licensed multi-engine and helicopter pilot. And to say that you're busy in the cockpit, when you're you know, instrument flight plan, your autopilot's on, you're just riding up there. You're not doing anything. You might look around, you might be looking at something. I mean, it's just not like you're really that busy, because everything else is being done for you.
Lee, you want to speak to this?
I have a feeling that the powers that be, whether in America or in other countries, know about these UFO abduction cases and probably feel that the public shouldn't be told more about it. It is, after all, a pretty terrifying thing that people are reporting, and nobody really knows how to prevent it. It's as though the Air Force would say, well, we are here protecting our skies, and the Navy is protecting our oceans, and all of you can feel very comfortable knowing that we're here for you. But they're not here for us because there isn't anything that they could do to prevent these incursions over our airspace, over our oceans or under our oceans, or over nuclear missile bases where UFOs have appeared and have in many cases disabled some of our nuclear missiles unexpectedly. I mean, I remember hearing those kinds of cases back in the 1960s and early 70s. And whenever it was on the news that something had gone wrong at Malmstrom Air Force Base earlier today, where 10 of our ICBM missiles mysteriously were turned off, the explanation that was generally given was, well, authorities on the site have said that it was a computer glitch, which caused these things to happen. Well, what else could they say? Could they actually admit on a moment that, well, we're told that strange objects appeared over the main gate at the base, went over the gate, and hovered over some of the silos where our missiles are kept, shined beams of light down, and then all of a sudden these missiles were disabled. And when the objects went away, the missiles came back to life. Well, they can't say that because that would admit that they can't prevent it from happening. And I don't think that they can prevent this ongoing experiencer culture that we're now living in. I mean, how do you tell the public that, yes, we are aware that many people around the world are having experiences with something, some kind of beings or creatures or intelligence. Sometimes they just take people out of their cars. Sometimes they take people out of their beds at night while they're sleeping and bring them to a place where they do a variety of experiments or medical examinations. How do you tell the public that? How do you acknowledge that without freaking everybody out? I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. These are not just people that are making these stories up. I don't think Travis and the other loggers made it up. I don't think Betty and Barney or other cases now. I've spoken to a gentleman who is a retired high-ranking official with the CIA and the intelligence community. And he told me this story with the understanding that I would not make it public, and I haven't. And he tells a story of how he and his wife were taken in the middle of the night. So the question is, how do you tell the public what's going on without scaring everybody? Because we depend on the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, our doctors, our leaders. We depend on them to protect us on this planet. And if they're telling us that they can't really protect us, where does that leave us all? I think that's a very scary thing to consider. People want to get on with their lives. I want to get on with my life. I don't want to know that that tonight something may happen to me in the middle of the night. I'd like to think that I could handle something like that. But it was one thing, me standing in a field and having a beam of light come down on my feet. But it's another thing where if I'm being escorted somewhere, floated somewhere out of my bed into another place, I don't know that I could even emotionally, physically survive something like that.
Me neither.
And I am amazed at how many people do survive this and are willing to tell their stories. So it's kind of a tough question, Captain Ron. How do we tell the public that there's something going on? We're only at the point now where the governments are saying, we will admit now there are things operating in our skies and we're looking into it. And we'll keep you informed. Please continue to fly the friendly skies.
Yeah,
because we don't want to frighten people. Right. But it is a very real, frightening thing that we need to come to grips with.
Ray Szymanski, do you have the answer to that question?
I actually wanted to address something that Lee had said earlier
Go ahead.
about how the Navy was making all of these videos public and everybody knows about it. Do you notice how crafty they were? They know it's an Air Force problem and they know the Air Force is going to get stuck with it again. So notice the Air Force, there's not a guy who's come forward except, and this is a shameless plug, in my new book, Swamp Gas My Ass, it's the pilot that has come forward who held a secret for 55 years, and he's the guy that intercepted a UFO, the famous swamp gas UFO in 1966. But he's the only Air Force guy to come forward like that. Why? Because, well, he's 85 years old and he's not going to have to answer questions for long. But the Navy was very clever to expose this, and you watch, the Air Force is going to get stuck with it.
Well, nobody wants to have egg all over their face. And so far, there have been a lot of omelets made, I think, by the Air Force.
Absolutely. And I worked for them for 40 years, so I heard it for all that time. And working at Wright Pat, it was always in the conversation about aliens in the tunnels.
Yeah, and you know, as we all know, one of the things that Dr. J. Allen Hynek never got over, never really fully recovered from the humiliation of when he brought up the term of swamp gas at all those press conferences in the 1960s in Michigan, when then Congressman Gerald Ford called him on this and demanded the congressional investigation, or at least the hearings of this, and basically calling out Dr. Hynek, saying that, what, this is all swamp gas? No, you can't say these kinds of things unless you can back it up. What was it? Was it Carl Sagan who used to say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? Okay, but that works on both sides. If the skeptics or the debunkers say something is not real and here's why, it's up to them to prove why.
Well, I want them to read Swamp Gas because I have 30 hours of videotape testimony of Colonel Gary K. Carroll, who was assigned to Selfridge Air Force Base in March of 1966. And when the klaxon went off, he and Lieutenant Colonel Nicholson scrambled in their F-106s and for 90 minutes chased a flying saucer around southeastern Michigan. And every detail, including the military records of both of those colonels, are in the book. Plus, I had to consult a formally classified top secret Umbra document published at one time by the National Security Agency in order to corroborate some of the other activities of these two pilots. So all I want to say is all those people who reported that UFO in 1966 in Michigan, you are now vindicated because Colonel Carroll has broken 55 years of secrecy.
Amazing.
And I'll say one other thing about this idea of classification, disclosure. In the 1980s, I interviewed former astronaut Gordon Cooper about UFOs for my UFO documentary album. And then we had him again. When I say we, James Fox and we worked on the Phenomenon documentary that came out last year. And we have Gordon Cooper on film where he's asked about the UFO, the flying saucer that landed on a dry lake bed out at Edwards Air Force Base back in the days before Gordon became an astronaut. And he had a film crew out there, and they called him. The film crew called him and said, "Sir, something just came out of the sky and it just landed out here. What would you like us to do about it?" And Cooper said, "Well, you got cameras there, right? You're a film crew?" And they said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, start filming." And so they did. And the films were then sent to Gordon, and he was able to see on the film before they packed it all up. He could see this thing. And then somebody arrived from either Washington or another base, but they confiscated the film from Gordon, and he said on camera, and he said to me in the 80s, he said, and the film was there, and then it was sent to Washington, never to be seen again. And in our film, The Phenomenon, he's asked, "Well, did you ever follow up on that film?" And he clearly says on camera, "Well, how would I follow up on something like that? Once it's out of my hands, I can't answer or ask any questions.
He said, who are you going to ask?
Yeah, who are you going to ask? I mean, it's out of my classification. In the military, there are different rungs on the ladder of security clearance. And if you're not at a certain rung, you don't get to ask and nobody gets to tell you. You don't have a need to know. And that can go all the way to the President of the United States, whoever that happens to be at any given moment. Again, in the phenomenon, we had on camera former President Bill Clinton, who was telling an audience overseas that someone had asked him about Area 51 and Roswell. Did you ever find anything there, Mr. President? And he said, look, I wouldn't be the first sitting president whose underlings kept things from him because of the need to know. And he said there are probably many bureaucrats out there who are just waiting for the current president to just finish his time in office, waiting for the next person to come in and start this whole process again. He said, I'm almost embarrassed to say that I did try and look into it. But he basically indicated that even presidents of the United States may not have the need to know exactly what's going on. That's a little uncomforting or discomforting to think about, I think.
Terrible. Agreed, Lee. Good point. Let's go back to Ray Jordan for a second here. Ray, you saw this case back in 1975. How does this compare to other cases you looked at over the years at APRO?
This is unique. What more can I say? I had another interesting case too that involved the solid light phenomenon. So that was, I knew nothing about that at the time, but I've since learned a little more about it. But Travis's case there's been nothing else like it. I had another abduction case that I worked on, but that kind of got out of hand. We went a little too long into the hypnosis.
Ray, do other cases hold up as well for as long as Travis's does, or have as many witnesses?
No, this is great, and especially with the information. This is great, unique.
Agreed. Plus, they were also so close to it. They were, I think Mike says, 93 feet from the craft. That's another unique aspect.
Yeah, I think the craft too was described as being down right around treetop level. So there's no way that could have been the lookout tower, any kind of lookout tower anywhere. So
yeah, that's kind of a ludicrous claim, don't you think?
I think so.
I agree.
Captain Ron, I got a question for Ray.
Go right ahead, please.
Ray, are you familiar with the Jesse Rosenberg case in England?
No.
That I sent some. I think I might have sent that to Captain Ron too. The video of her being interviewed.
I saw that. Yes.
I'm really interested in the ancient stuff. Always have been. I like comparing cases from around the world just to see if people have similar experiences. I think it validates. And you ought to look that case up. It is on YouTube. There's only a couple of videos. I did get an email a few days ago, from one of Jennifer's sources, that the two boys that witnessed this craft with their mother are alive and well still, but they were not wanting to talk about that case yet. I'm hoping someone eventually will befriend them and visit with them. But her description of the beings, she could see clearly, she said, through what she described basically as a windshield. The interviewer asked her, was it porthole? She said, no, it was like a wind screen, as they were sitting side by side. But the beings she described, and this was in the 50s, this happened to her, they were very, very close to what Travis described. Very close, from the slightly taller foreheads to the golden hair to even the uniform they were wearing, which she could see. And the way the craft departed was extremely similar to what the last thing Travis saw as he awoke on the side of the road. So I do think you guys ought to take a look at that.
Ray, I'm going to go ahead and post that on theobservationdeck.com. We're going to, I'll add that to the list of videos. I'm going to post a lot of these things Jennifer's provided. We're going to share with everyone. They're welcome to just watch these videos. There's endless information on this case, but we'll add those, Gary, so they'll be on there for people to check out. I wanted to go back to John here. John from MUFON. How do you feel that this case compares to the other cases you've looked at MUFON?
Well, I'd like to hit a couple just quick topics, but I do a lot of work. I've been working 4 or 5 years now with the ERT, the Experiencer Research Team. I talk to abductees on a regular basis. It's similar. I mean, there's all kinds of different stories I hear, different entities, different purposes, but there's a commonality that runs through all of them. Travis is not unusual in that way. I don't think, but except for the length of time. I mean, 5 days is kind of unusual. Although I just talked to someone just a little earlier this year that had a trip from Florida that took 12 hours longer than it should have, with a full load of people in the car. They all noticed that an additional 12 hours were added to their trip after they saw a UFO, and they have GPS records that show that it took 12.8 hours to go 7.3 miles after they saw the UFO. So
more than my mother drives.
I mean, that's about the second longest, compared to Travis. But I wanted to add that regarding the tree growth, I mean, I've gotten a couple speakers for the ERT, Nick Pope and Dolan. Preston Dennett agreed to speak to the ERT, and I had a chance to talk to him a little bit. And one of the things I asked him was, have you ever, in all the cases you've investigated, he's a prolific collector of cases. Have you ever run across where animals or plants were affected? And he answered the animal part. And then he said, he's got a couple of books. I think it's volume 2 of Not From Here, and his most recent book, 300 Healings. He's got sections in there about plants being affected by alien contact, alien interaction. He's got a number of cases. I think that is further proof that the UFOs do have some effect on plants. I think that should be brought. I know Jennifer went to University of Arizona, tried to get
thrown out.
Yeah, got thrown out. Yeah. So I don't know who you're going to get as far as experts to look at this, but Preston might be a good one to start with. And one last topic regarding the current, reconfiguration of military opinion. What are they trying to hide now? I do think I think it was Lee and I've heard Nick Pope say this too, that there's like a second line of defense they've taken. The first line of defense from the 40s and on was, let's just deny all of it. Well, they can't deny all of it anymore because they now admitted, okay, something is really up there. Well, what's their second line of defense? Well, let's still continue to ridicule those who claim abduction. That's their second line of defense. But are they interested? You're goddamn right they're interested. These dark organizations are digging into this. They're tapping phones. I myself have noticed, very strangely, since becoming involved in the ERT, that military types seem to wander up and just strike up casual conversations with me. Gee, you're part of this ERT. Gee, what are you finding out? And then in the course of conversation, it might come out that, oh yeah, I've got a top secret clearance and I've had one for 23 years. Or I used to work for Special Forces. Or the most startling was a fella that I met at a funeral of a friend, an audio friend, that just happened to strike up a conversation, and was surprised to hear that I was involved with MUFON, and then said he used to work with Major Quintilla of Project Blue Book. Oh yeah, yeah. He said I'm a longtime CIA person, and I had an office right next to his. What? Major Quintilla, Yeah. And you just happen to be talking to me about what I know about this stuff. The little clicks on the phone. It's like, I don't know, man. I think they're interested and they're keeping tabs of people, of what, people that are in this field, probably all you people on the screen here.
I completely agree. John, do you know that there's one of the other witnesses to the Travis Walton case who was not part of the logging crew that was across the way was a hunter and his wife.
Yes.
And we find out later that he worked for military intelligence as well. That is a hell of a coincidence. That
Yeah,
that guy
kind of
worked on-
odd that he was there, wasn't it?
I mean, that is, it just smells, you know. I always say you don't drive down the 405 freeway in a white Bronco if you didn't do anything wrong, you know. Hey, Bruce, can you tell us how you feel that the Travis Walton case compares to the other cases you've looked at? I know you've had your own experiences, but how does this compare to the other things, the other UAPs and the other contact experiences you've investigated?
His case by itself stands out because of the time he was missing. But more importantly, it's what his crew did in reporting his case to the police that got everything turning, and the news journalists wanting to write about this. How many other cases have you heard where this much exposure has been gotten from any individual case? Many other cases are very similar, but go unnoticed or unreported. That's one thing I've found from talking to various people. So I'm of the opinion that it's important to dissect every case that you come up with good, solid evidence in order to document the facts. And unfortunately, when the debunkers get involved and the skeptics, they want to confuse everybody. And that doesn't go very far with me. When I discovered that I lived next to a UFO hotspot in New York back in 1992, I saw a miniseries on television called Intruders by Bud Hopkins. And I said, wait a minute, here I had been a closet scientist working in the academia where they never talk about this stuff. And I went to the bookstore and the manager gave me that book and another book by Ellen Crystal called Silent Invasion. And I knew some friends who knew her, and I contacted her and said, would you prove to me that this is really happening, all this stuff that you report in your book? And she said, sure, I'll stop by and pick you up and we'll go out and skywatch. That first night I was out there, it was what I didn't realize. We were standing right over an alien underground base in the Wallkill River Valley, right near Stewart International Airport and Air Force Base, with many other former airstrips up and down the base. So the whole valley, Wallkill River Valley, was very militarized, you might say. And but the amazing thing is that so few people, except the local residents, knew about the activity that was flying around. And that first night out, I mean, these ships were coming in, flying around us and diving behind trees and into the ground, and then coming up out of the ground. And I said, wait a minute, this is not possible. You know, how in the world can they do that? And Ellen Crystal had reported in her book that she had openings or tunnels open up right in front of her when she was crossing fields at night, and warm air come out. And then when they realized that she was a witness, they closed up the tunnel. But she always heard these noises in the forest of what appeared to be mining underground and things of this nature. So all the local residents that I've talked to had seen stuff. Oh yeah, we see it all the time. You know, it doesn't bother us at all. Whereas I've talked to people who worked at Stewart Air Force Base 9 miles away, and they said, I never heard any of this. We didn't know there was any activity going on the other side of the valley. And so I started a 24 square mile magnetic survey, since Ellen had said that underground, there was underground activity. I figured that with a sensitive geological proton magnetometer, I could go out and map the area and detect anomalous underground signals. Sure enough, it took me 3 years to complete that survey, 1,800 stations, and I recorded many locations where there was underground magnetic activity that should not have occurred, well above that of background radiation or magnetism. And so I went out there and I found the data. And amazingly, as with Ellen, when she went out into the field, the craft would come to her and fly around her and give her photo ops. and she took advantage of that. And you can see some of those pictures she published in her book, Silent Invasion. And I suddenly had others craft coming and following me around. In fact, the first week I was out there taking magnetic readings along the road, I was shot. I was taking a series of measurements with the computer hanging from my neck around my chest. And all of a sudden this crack, like that of a rifle, hunting rifle, sounded, and I felt this sting in my chest. And I saw my shirt move in and out. I didn't feel any internal pain, so I continued to take measurements. And what I recorded was a negative 495 gamma anomaly that occurred exactly at the time that the shot rang out. And I then put my equipment into my truck, drove home, pulled off my shirt, and there was this round bruise on the lower left of my chest that was indented with a red dot. Since I didn't feel any internal pain, I didn't worry about it. But 10 days later, I started passing blood. And I went to the doctor in Suffern, about an hour away, and he checked my urine and said, "You have a very bad kidney infection." So he gave me antibiotics on the spot. And on the way home, I was met by a craft and paced all the way home. And it parked itself in the sky, and I got a photograph of it where there's no star on a star chart. So that activity was very real out there. And I spent 11 years documenting over 140 close encounters. And they're in my book and on my web pages. Of course, the government has been following me all along, in great detail. You'd have a check on my web pages to see who's been visiting. And of course, they won't tell you that, well, it's the CIA in Langley. But if it's in that area of Virginia that the server is located, you can be pretty certain that they have been watching me.
Wow. Listen, Bruce brings up a really, really good point here. I'll come right to you in 1 second, Lee. Often these cases don't gain fame. There's no book, there's no movie, there's no national attention. People often have these experiences, but they have apprehension to come forward. Hearing the Travis Walton case, we can understand why they wouldn't want to come forward and deal with all that and go through what the fellows have gone through. What about all these unknown accounts? Do you want to address that, Lee, or did you have something else you wanted to say?
Well, I wanted to actually confirm what Bruce was just talking about. I believe that the entire experience of all the sightings that he investigated, I believe this is part of the now legendary Hudson Valley, New York.
Yes,
area.
it is. Very much so.
And I first became aware of this right after I started working for NBC Radio in 1978 and 79. I started hearing about stories coming out of the Hudson Valley, just north of New York City. And I spent an entire week of interviewing a variety of people in the area who had had experiences. And I was interested in this because Dr. Hynek was very interested in this and went there. And he was investigating this at the time. And a couple of months ago, I gave a presentation in Pine Bush, New York.
Wow.
I was at the annual Pine Bush UFO Festival. And there were three of us who were speakers, myself, Richard Dolan, and Mark D'Antonio. And just meeting the people there in Pine Bush and talking to them and realizing this really was a total hotspot of activity, and still is, from what people are saying is going on there. And so I just wanted to let you know, Bruce, that I know of what you speak just from covering it from a media point of view. And it did make local news in the New York area if it didn't make it nationally.
Right. Well, you do. You've probably read Night Siege by Hynek and Imbrogno.
Yes, yes.
All of the thousands of sightings that and descriptions of things that happened in the Hudson Valley Prime, whereas Pine Bush is off to the west, still in the UFO corridor, as we call it. But the thing that amazes me is that this activity appears to have been going on for thousands of years in that valley. And even the Native Americans, described things, and the early settlers and explorers encountered little people in the valley.
Yeah.
And I was able to document where the entrance to this main entrance to the underground base is, and it's very active. It's been active. And, the Native Americans, the Lenni Lenape, built a sweat lodge right on top of the entrance with a mound. And the ETs went out of their way to point this out. And when we flew over it, I saw the mound, saw the circular area where the sweat lodge had been. And the question is, why did they build it there? Well, to them, these plasma lights that were coming out of the ground and going into the ground were spirits. And so they wanted to communicate with that spirit life. That's my guess. But that gives you an idea just how long this activity has been going on there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, can we get Ray Szymanski to comment on that? What do you think about these cases, Ray, that even you've heard about at the inside guys at the military that don't get any national attention, that none of us have even heard of?
Let's take it from the Air Force perspective, because that's who I worked for so long. Imagine if, Captain Ron, if I said, tomorrow you are a doctor and you have to perform a heart replacement surgery. Well, obviously I've given you a job that's impossible. And what you have is the Air Force was given that job, to keep the skies free of all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it's a job they can't do. We know this technology is so advanced. And, even that ODNI report said, it's a national security issue. It's a safety of flight issue. These things display technology far beyond what we have. So who wants a job like that? So that's the first thing. And then who wants to come forward and say, guys, we've got these things here and we don't know how to deal with them. We do not have the wherewithal to do that. So who really wants to go on record? I guess the head of the ODNI had to, because of whatever the legislation was. So why would you go forward and broadcast that, hey, I've got a job that is impossible? So that's why you don't see a lot of these things put forward by the military or the government bureaucracy. They just don't want to be saddled with the defeat. And that's clearly they have a problem they can't solve.
Also, if I may comment, many people do not want to know that this is true, that this is really happening. And they shy away from it. So there's a very large percentage of the population that even though they're curious about it, they don't want, the Texas Chain Massacre to be real, right? They don't want these horrors to visit them. And they don't want to know that their neighbor was abducted in the middle of the night. And when returned, he had injuries. They don't want to know that because there's nobody they can turn to. So they would rather live in a fantasy world.
I had a person who did a root canal on me. And in fact, I was getting ready to go to one of the international UFO conferences in Fountain Hills, and my tooth acted up and I was going to be there away for a week. So I ran in, she took me on an emergency basis, and I was telling her, thank you, I'm going away to this UFO conference for a week. And, this thing would have been killing me. And so, in between the cotton in the mouth and getting prepped, she asked me a couple of questions. And then finally she said, most of us really don't want to know about this.
Wow.
And this was a highly trained medical professional. And that's exactly what she told me. We don't want to know.
All right, well, let me ask all you guys, what do you think it's going to take to change the rest of the world's opinion on this topic?
To what end? What are we going to be able to do about it? Even if the public admits and the government admits that this is going on and people are being taken without their consent and operated on, aboard, a foreign spacecraft. What are we going to do? There are people walking among us that I've met who claim to be ETs in human bodies. And you've all heard about the alleged hybrid, phenomenon going on. But people mistaken it, thinking that, well, if you cross, two different animals together, you're going to get something that looks a little bit about like each one. But in fact, one of the problems that people don't want, the government especially, don't want us to know, is that they are tweaking our DNA through over thousands of generations, and they are moving us in a new direction, not necessarily to become more like them, but to become better vessels for their in consciousness on Earth.
Well, I would say, since we don't really know what their agenda is, but they obviously have an agenda, I don't have a problem with the concept that I often hear about, that they're here to help us. They're here to fix us, to change us, to help raise our consciousness. Well, okay, but many people still ask the question, why don't they just show themselves over every major city, like in all the movies that we see where that happens? But usually it turns out that it's bad for us because it's part of an invasion of our planet. So I don't think that they're here to invade us. If that were the case, I don't think they're here to eat us. If that were the case, we probably would have been gone by now.
Yeah.
So if there is something that points to the fact that maybe we were brought here, we were seeded here a very long time ago, I don't even have a problem with that, because I want to do what I can to make my existence meaningful for me and other people around me. I think we would all like that. And I understand why so many people don't want to know about it, because they don't want to be affected by something that seems to have such a negative connotation, because there's so much about this we don't know. There's too many questions about the whole UFO, UAP story. And so how would the public react if our leaders admitted that this is going on? I don't really know. How would it affect religion? No one's even brought that up, the whole idea of the religious aspect of it. I think we need to, well, it's not that we need
fuels.
To. We don't even really have a choice. We need to let this play out, because it's going to play out somehow over time.
I think that my own conclusion I've come to is that they've done this before. They've visited new species throughout the universe before, and so they kind of got a playbook. And I see chapter 1 of their playbook is, or step 1 of their playbook is, okay, for a couple thousand years, why don't you fly around in the atmosphere, show your light so the creatures down below get used to your presence. And then step 2 might be pick up a few of them, examine their DNA, see what their genetics are about, maybe tell a few about what's going on. And you slowly percolate that information of their existence, and it might take a couple more thousand years. I don't know. I don't know. It does strike me too that it's funny, of all the shapes that could be coming to visit us. I mean, they could look like octopuses or trees or butterflies or something. Why do they have 2 arms and 2 legs and 2 eyes, and they're symmetrical about center line, like we are? It sure seems to me like we're related genetically, maybe a long way back or something. There's some big link between them and us. Just looking at them.
No doubt. Gary, did you want to say something about that?
Isn't this the latest statistic? About 50% of the population now believes that we're not the only gig in the universe. So I think we've made progress that way as people such as you, Captain Ron, your show, and all the guys here keep questioning and bringing it up and talking to people. I think a lot of them are realizing how vast outer space is. It's mind-boggling when you think about it.
No doubt. This the next thing I wanted to ask you fellas is how have you seen this change over the year? We've all been at this game for a long time. What 1975, what's changed in the public perception of this, do you think?
Cameras, everybody's got one now, you know. Everybody's social media, instant communications, you know, it's just everybody knows what's happening, good or bad, pretty darn quick, you know. So I think it's you know, the more we get clear video, the more we get, you know, stuff that's substantiated by multiple witnesses, that always helps too, you know, because it's hard to call the whole city a liar, you know, whenever
right.
they experience something, you know.
Hey, Ray Szymanski, go ahead. You had something to say.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with the last speaker in what he said. So, you know,
how about the other Ray? Ray Jordan, have you seen things really change the perception of this since you started investigating these cases?
Oh yeah, I started back in the early 50s. I've been at this a long time. I mean, I was initially a nuts and bolts guy, you know, scientist. And I saw the phenomena itself change from time to time, kind of quantum leaps, like the vehicle interference cases suddenly, and then the occupants. And it's, you know, it didn't take me very long. I'm looking more and more at this being a paranormal thing, perhaps even spiritual. I was fascinated with Ray Fowler's recent book. And I'm seriously rereading all of Ballet's books again. I think I don't agree with everything he's concluding, but I think he's going in the right direction.
I think, Ray, you just brought up another great point that we really haven't touched on. Do you guys all feel that this is 3D solid nuts and bolt craft? Do you feel it's interdimensional? Do you feel it's from Earth? Do you guys have an opinion on what you think this phenomenon, the source of it is?
All of the above.
Yeah.
And possibly other parts that we haven't even thought about yet.
Yes.
I have started considering, just from descriptions of encounters of ships, of pictures, of videos, maybe some of these ships are not ships, but that they themselves have some consciousness to them or intelligence to them. That it's not a nuts and bolts thing. I have never believed that we have scientists on our planet who are smart enough to get hold of a crashed UFO, for example, and start taking it apart and figuring out how to back engineer how the thing was built so that we could have them for ourselves, you know, to have our own little fleet of UFOs. I don't know that we're smart enough to figure that out if it's from a technology that, oh, let's just give them 500 years ahead of us, maybe 1,000 years ahead of us, if it's even technology. So for us to think, but this is how humans think, for us to think that we can figure it out, if somebody else has figured it out, then we can too.
Yeah. We can figure it out, we'd be easy on each other right away, you know.
Yes, that's right. You hear so many stories these days of so much of the things that have happened in our society technologically with all high fiber optics and things, that it must be due to the fact that we've been given a little bit of help from the extraterrestrials. Well, why do we assume that? I mean, I'll give our own scientists and technology experts, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that we are smart on certain levels. We're smarter now than we were 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Okay, and we will continue to grow as a species, but it doesn't mean that it's another one of those things that Stan Friedman used to say. He says, when somebody says that bit of UFO behavior is impossible, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to do that.
Right.
So it must be impossible.
Right.
So that's not a scientific way of approaching it, but that's what they say. I don't know how to do it, so nobody else knows how to do it either.
Yes, but on one of the things I'm exposed to on the internet with meeting theoretical physicists and physicists that are actually working with this material called metamaterial and quasi-crystals, we're
Yeah.
getting very close to knowing how it works, but duplicating their technology is still part of the problem. Yet the Navy wants the public to believe that they, through their patents, that they've already engineered a anti-gravity triangle and other types of craft. And I see this as more a smokescreen in order to allay fears among the public that this is actually extraterrestrial. But the interesting thing that I discovered when I was out in the field is nobody pays much attention to the sounds. They always, you hear when somebody has a sighting, they don't make any sounds. They're silent, and that's usually a characteristic that it's not, a conventional aircraft. And yet, these beings that live in an underground base in the Wallkill River Valley are flying below the minimum flight altitude of 1,500 feet of all of the aircraft, the conventional and military that come out of Stewart Airport. And one of the things that they try to do is mimic the lights and shapes of our craft enough so that it'll fool people. And they have gotten to the point where they can produce sounds that sound like jet engines. And yet when I recorded these and analyzed them, the sounds are all reverse Doppler, which means that they are inversely presented so that the sound frequencies decrease on approach to the microphone and increase on departure. And Dr. Jack Sarfati has confirmed that this is exactly what the metamaterial of their hulls have documented. And metamaterial is one of the hot sciences right now because of all the unusual characteristics that come out of it. And so there is a way of knowing if a craft is a conventional or unconventional, and that's by recording its sound, if it makes sound, and to analyze that sound.
Interesting. And of course, the Travis Walton case did have sound, and that was a big part of their account. Was right before he got zapped, it sort of charged up and made this loud sound and then released for the bolt. So that's an interesting aspect, again, about this case. Clock's ticking here, guys. I'd like to ask you something that's going to be difficult for everyone. You guys all have decades of looking at different cases. I would like to ask each one of you, if you could, if you were speaking to a person outside of our community, a non-believer, not to the choir, and you had 2 minutes to do so, what would you say to them is what you've learned about studying this topic over the last so many decades? Let's just go in order again. Ray Jordan, what do you think you would say to someone about the culmination of what you've learned over that time of studying this? Maybe your best guess as to what you think is happening.
I don't know what's happening. That's a good question. I really don't know. All I would say was that something really is happening. One thing I can't figure out is why other people aren't fascinated with this subject because of the enormous implications. So there's really not an awful lot you can say to the general public, I think.
I completely agree, Ray. It fascinates me that other people aren't as fascinated by this topic. It's shocking.
Right. One of the things I've discovered is that if a person has never seen a ghost, they probably won't believe that ghosts exist. If people haven't seen a UFO, they probably won't believe that UFOs exist. It's that personal contact and experience that changes their minds most of the time.
Lee?
I get asked a question. I get asked the same question over and over again. First, when do I think there's going to be full disclosure? And I generally will say to people, it's already happened. It's been happening for a very long time. Happens all the time. And they say, well, what are you talking about? There's been no announcement. And I would say, what kind of an announcement are you looking for? And who do you want to make this announcement? Do you want your local politicians? Do you want the President of the United States to make an announcement? Do you want the United Nations to make an announcement? And I know a little bit about that, trying to get the United Nations to do something. And who has the authority? Do you want the Vatican to make an announcement? People don't even know, the public doesn't know that the Vatican has 2 observatories. They have Vatican astronomers who are looking into the cosmos. What are they looking for? What are they looking at? Why do they care about what's out there? and I will say to people, especially disbelievers, I will say, I'll just ask them a question. How much time have you personally put into looking into this topic? How many hours a day or week or month or year do you personally look into UFOs or UAP or ghosts or psychic phenomena or Skinwalker Ranch or anything like this? What have you done personally to come up with a valid personal opinion one way or the other, that there's nothing out there or that there really is something out there? And generally people will say, oh, I don't really put a lot of credence into
My
that.
mind is made up. Hey, Lee,
Yeah.
what if it is announced? Then do they still believe it? Look at the COVID. Look at the division we have over something as simple as COVID compared to this thing. Even if they do say, okay, it's real, I bet you there's a percentage that still doesn't believe it, right?
Well, there'll be people say, okay, there was the announcement. I read it in the papers, the New York Times, which is all the news that's fit to print. Fine, but I don't feel like I'm being affected by this whatsoever. I sleep soundly every night. No one has floated me out of my bed through the walls and up to a ship. You know, it hasn't affected me personally. And so until I'm affected, I'm going to go about my daily business, my 9-to-5 job, if I'm employed. And I want to take care of myself, my family, and just live my life to the fullest that I know. But don't bother me with any other stuff that doesn't affect me negatively. I don't want to know about it. I'll leave that to the experts.
As well, Lee, that even if it is real, who cares? What?
That's right. That's right.
How can you not care about that?
I mean, look at all the publicity a few weeks ago when Captain Kirk went up into suborbital space. I mean, I think there was more criticism than there were accolades about him. It's like, come on, folks. I mean, please keep it all simple or in perspective. After almost 50 years of looking into this, I'm convinced that Earth is being visited by something or someone from someplace else. I don't know where that someplace else is, whether it's a physical place or a non-physical, other reality, whatever. The late Edgar Mitchell, astronaut, scientist, said to me, he's firmly convinced that not only are we being visited, but that they're using, one of the places that they use to study us is the moon, because they could just go onto the other side of the moon and use that as a great place to start seeing what people on Earth are doing. They need to get here for some reason. They're here in a couple of minutes. I mean, and to hear him talk like that, a man who earned such respect, to hear him say, and he grew up in Roswell, by the way. Yeah. To hear him say that he's talked with many people who believe that there's something else going on. And I will give accolades. My current hero of the day, or of the last few weeks, is Bill Nelson, the NASA administrator. Oh my gosh, this guy, and when you think about it, people like Bill Nelson, who runs NASA, that means he's working for the President of the United States. And so I've imagined that President Biden has had a conversation with Nelson and said, look, if you want to talk a little bit about the UFO thing or life out there, or maybe life is visiting us here, do it. Do it comfortably, do it realistically. Don't try and frighten anyone, because just 2 weeks ago, Bill Nelson did an on-camera interview with the University of Virginia, I believe, and he was saying things like, look, this universe is so vast that many scientists now admit that there is something going on with objects in the sky that we don't know what they are. They are real, it's not fictitious, and we need to learn about these things, and we have to stop the ridicule of people who dare to report these things.
Lee, you can imagine how hard it is for some of these people who don't believe, because you just said the words, I've been studying this for 50 years. I look at it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It might be from space. It might be from here. It might be interdimensional. I got nothing.
Right.
That's hard for someone to say, hey, I got to get on board with this.
I always say to people, I don't think that full disclosure is going to happen in my lifetime. I honestly believe that, because I don't think that we, the population of this planet, are ready for the truth. I honestly don't believe that. And so part of me feels frustrated that I spent all this time looking into it, but I realize that it was time well worth spending, because I feel like I have a better grip on what may be going on, but I sure don't know the rest of it. I'm frightened by some of the possibilities of what's happening here, but I don't let it rule my life. I want to learn from this,
right,
and become a better person or a better citizen. And all I try to do is just reach out and present information to people in the most credible way. I say to people, without meaning to offend anyone, whenever I do a presentation, I'll say, please, first of all, folks, don't believe anything that I'm about to tell you over the next hour and a half. And they go, what? What did he say? And I said, I will open some doors for you. I will provide you with links, and you need to decide what you want to find out about. And please, please also don't get all of your information about UFOs just from watching Ancient Aliens. I mean, please, there are many places to get really, really good, accurate, credible stuff. Explore this, but only if you want to. And if you don't, then don't. That's okay too.
Hey, okay, Ray, let's go to, oh, there you are, Ray. Lee missed a part of the question when I said, if you had 2 minutes to tell somebody, can you try in a couple minutes to tell somebody, what would you say about your decades of looking at this?
When I started out, I had heard all of that information from everybody at Wright Pat, especially my mentor, whose name was Al. He was a mid-level engineer at the time. He's the guy who said, hey, have you heard about our aliens? And told me we had aliens in the tunnel. So when I started to read stuff, shortly thereafter, I got books, and, then you get a family and you're coaching, and you just really don't have time for that. And then 1997 happens, and you've got the Phoenix Lights. So, the kids are older. I'm not coaching. I'm not traveling as much. And so my interest is back, and I'm starting to do all this research. I did not care if there were aliens or no aliens. I just wanted to start right here and go back all those decades to see if Al was telling me the truth. And what I discovered is, particularly with book 2 called Victoria's Secret Truth, I studied a family for 2 years, and the key characters are a grandmother and her grandson. And the medical, clinical, photographic evidence points to her claim that she has been a unwilling yet accepting participant in a hybridization program. And then so I got to interview her at length. Of course, I have all those things recorded, and her grandson, who started to have very similar types of encounters when he was young. And I basically spent a couple weeks on site with the family. And the interesting thing was interviewing the grandson, who of course was still very young, and telling me a story like we're sitting at a campfire, but being actually in the house where all of this occurred, and then taking me through the steps of where he started in the bedroom and being floated downstairs and that sort of thing. So never in my wildest dreams that I thought that I would go from, like Bruce says, the nuts and bolts kind of person, to being led through this 2-year study of this family that basically the grandmother says, I'm part of a hybridization, close encounters of the seventh kind of thing. And she describes her entities with great detail. So, that whole question of what are these things? Are they interdimensional? Are they extraterrestrial? I think in this instance, they sound extraterrestrial, but they could just be a screen memory. Like I believe John said, they're symmetrical, 2 arms, 2 legs. Well, maybe that's just something that's implanted in the brain because they're really terrible looking. And we don't want the people to deal with that because they're going to just freak out even more. So for me, I went from being a right down the middle kind of guy to, oh yeah, there is something really happening here. And there are just too many people with too many common stories and too much evidence to ignore. And there is something happening. Exactly what it is, I don't know, but I have my leanings. And of course, in the trilogy I wrote, I share all my thoughts, and that's my statement for the record.
Thanks, Ray. And for those of you out there who were not paying attention, let me just go over really quick Ray's titles, because the guy has the most provocative titles of any books ever written. We have 50 Shades of Grays, Victoria's Secret Truth, and Swamp Gas, My Ass. So those are the titles that Ray has come up with for his books, and I think that's a lot of fun. I appreciate that. John, why don't we get your 2-minute take on what you would say the culmination of your years of looking at this is?
Well, when I've been interested in UFOs since I was a kid. I was a member of NICAP and APRO back in junior high school. Kind of got bored with, after a couple of years, another light in the sky. So moved on to other topics. But then more recently got into UFOs about, 8-10 years ago. And now that I'm retired, I'm doing this work with MUFON and the ERT group. And when my retired friends found out that I was doing this, they said, John, you're not saying you really believe in UFOs. And I've told the story several times. I say, I think that's a 2-part question. The first part is, a person saw something they couldn't identify. That's a fact. I mean, unless they're hoaxing or, crazy or something, that's a fact. The other part is, what was it? That's the belief part. I said, I'm very much into the fact part. What did the person observe? What happened to them? And I'd love to talk all day long about what it might be, but there's 2 parts to that. I think there's the fact part and the belief part. I preface what I say to people with that. And then I might tell them a few cases of people that I've spoken to. One comes to mind right away, an older lady who wanted to just share her story when she was about, 70 or 80 or something, and she wanted to tell someone before she died. So I talked to her as part of this ERT assignment, and she said when she was about 5, she was taken from her bedroom onto a ship with her mother. Her mother was led down one hallway. She was taken out another hallway and was put in a dentist type chair, which is typical. And these beings were doing something to her. One stuck his finger in her mouth to examine her teeth and gums. And she said, like any 5-year-old at a dentist office, I bit down on his finger. Wow, I said, you bit down on his finger. What was it like? What did it feel like? And she said, well, it didn't have a bony structure inside. It was more like softer cartilage. I said, that's an amazing fact. I mean, that needs to be publicized. Things like that need to be gathered together. And she had a couple more experiences on the ship. And then it was time to go. They took her back to her bedroom, and as they were floating through the air back to her bedroom, she passed by a tree, and she reached out and grabbed some green leaves off the tree. The next morning she awoke and thought, wow, was that all a dream? And she pulled back her covers, and there were the green leaves. And that usually gets people's attention. Yeah, there's one other story I tell people, that there was a guy, a lot of these, when you ask about changes, there used to be a lot of medical exams, not so much anymore. It's more dreamlike things and messages and information being conveyed lately. There seems to be a change in their agenda. But one of the guys I talked to, he was really thoroughly well-educated man, really thought he had like this exceptionally vivid dream, but he wasn't sure. I said, okay, tell me about this dream. And he said, well, I found myself on board this craft and you know, in a dentist type chair. You know, ding, you know, that kind of confirms it to me. And the walls were all kind of rounded and that ding, another, you know, marker. And there were these beings doing something to me. And I said, well, what did they look like? And he said, I really couldn't see him that well because I didn't have my glasses on. I said, hey, buddy, I don't think you need to put your spectacles on when you're dreaming to see clearly. He said, you know, you're right. I don't ever recall having had to put my glasses on in dreams before. I said, I don't think that was a dream. I tell a few stories like that to people, and along with the two-part, you know, fact versus belief thing. And hopefully they get intrigued and I can tell them more stories and maybe they'll buy me a free beer or something.
Right. Which is the ultimate goal of all of this anyway, right? We're going to come right down to it. All right. Last but not least, the nicest man in the world, Gary. What is your 2-minute take on what you've learned after looking at this stuff for so long?
You know, I tend to be the one to bring the subject up to people. And I think it's your circle of trust. You when you talk to people, you find that maybe their mother saw something or their fathers, and they believe them, you know, but they just never have come forward with it. I think the communication like that opens the doors for more and more, and perhaps will allow you to even have an interview with the experiencer that saw it. You know, I've never had an experience that I'm aware of. I've seen something from a distance. The only time I've ever really could tell you I saw something was I was in Bolivia at the Tiwanaku site. I was there with David Childress, and you know, and I saw this thing, and I didn't even see it first. Someone was with me actually saw it first, and then I looked and I seen it. But that was my experience. But I can say that I definitely seen this thing. Again, it fell in the classification of UFO. Couldn't make anything out. But again, talking to people, I like talking about the subject. I like comparing stories. I like discussing the ancient stuff, you know, and that tends to open a lot of doors. And if I may add one more thing, Ron, I talked to Mike Rogers last night. He's not doing very well. Hopefully you didn't get the last interview with him, because he's definitely, you know, having some difficulties. But he had asked me, and I wanted to fulfill his wish. He did ask me to let people know that he does have 2 or 3, maybe 4 of the original paintings that he did for sale. And I just wanted to get that out to you guys.
No problem, Gary. Thank you. Absolutely. Well, I hope he feels better. Listen, I feel like we were all lucky that Travis and these guys were brave enough to share their story and endure all the ridicule and nonsense they've taken over the years. And Travis is still out there stating his case, which is really great. And we're also very lucky to have all you guys here sharing your insights. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. And it really does mean a lot. And all of your research is certainly recognized and appreciated. So thank you very much. All the avatars clap. You go down to your name and you go down to clap. And let's
Captain
give a
Ron.
round of applause. Yes, sir.
I would like to just introduce the audience to one fact that I discovered, is that there have been estimates as to how long ET has been here, and the 50,000 years has been one. And yet I discovered an ancient alien probe over 500 feet on a side, triangular, entombed in Ordovician rock in the Walkill River Valley, still active, nuclear powered, and sending signals out into space. So ET has known about Earth and had been on Earth for over 400 million years.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you guys again. I really appreciate it.